Cold water floods his lungs. Darkness. Silence. And then a bright white light hits his eyes so sharply that Dan Pack jerks his whole body and gasps for air. There's air. It's real. It smells of pine needles and wet earth. Dan is lying on his back in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by towering pine trees, and looking up at a sky that definitely doesn't belong to any state in America. 2 moons. One white and one with a faint blue tinge. A system window flashes right before his eyes as a translucent rectangle. Cool. Collector. Rank F. Starting inventory. A rusty axe. A 0.5-liter canteen. 3 days' worth of rations. Dan blinks. He tries to brush the window away with his hand. It obediently slides aside. To his right, a man in his 40s sits on the ground in a tattered business suit, rocking back and forth. It's a bug. It's a bug. It's a bug. The man repeats the same thing over and over with his eyes closed, tears streaming down his cheeks. A little further away, a teenager of about 15 stands in a circle of 7 or 8 people, snapping his fingers. With each snap, a shower of orange sparks bursts from his palm. The onlookers gasp. The teenager smiles. A tag hangs above his head. Fire Mage. Rank B. Dan slowly sits down. His mind is empty and quiet. He remembers the cold water. He remembers the steering wheel slipping from his hands. He remembers the black river beyond the windshield. And that's it. So he's dead. It's a fact. And he accepts it with the same calmness with which he accepted the broken chainsaw in the middle of the workday. We'll fix it. Or we won't. But sitting around and crying is pointless either way. He picks up a rusty axe from the ground. He runs his thumb along the blade. Dull. Jagged. But it's still usable if he sharpens it. Dan surveys the clearing. 50 or 60 people are standing in groups, yelling at each other. Someone is demanding an explanation. Someone is shouting that this is a kidnapping. 2 burly guys are already jostling each other, and one of them is clutching a pocket knife. None of them are looking at the trees. None of them are listening to the forest. Dan is listening. Somewhere to the right, behind a dense spruce grove, water is murmuring. Not rainwater. Not stagnant water. Living, flowing water running over rocks. He stands up, slings the axe over his shoulder, and heads toward the sound. 20 minutes later, he finds the stream. It's not wide, about 1.5 meters, with a clear, rocky bottom and cold water that tastes slightly mineral-like. Dan fills his canteen. He drinks. He fills it again. The system window flashes. Resource obtained. Clean water. Above average quality. +2 experience. He stares at the message for a long second. Then he looks at the stream. Then back at the message. 2 experience points just for collecting water. A battle mage in a clearing would get his 2 points for killing a wolf in a life-threatening situation. Dan got them just for bending down to the stream. He crouches down by the water and, for the first time today, almost smiles. Almost. Something familiar is growing along the stream. Dan plucks a stem and rubs it between his fingers. Wild mint. The system window confirms it. A medicinal plant. Average quality. Experience +1. He walks about 100 meters along the bank. Mint. Experience. Sorrel. Experience. Burdock root. Experience. Young stinging nettle. Experience. By the end of his first hour in the forest, Dan reaches level 3. His first skill unlocks. Eye of the Earth. Level 1. Radius. 5 meters. The world around him changes slightly. It's as if someone has applied a thin filter over reality. The roots of the plants underground begin to glow faintly. A vein of clay in the stream's bank stands out in a murky reddish hue. A rock by the shore pulses with a dull gray light, and a tiny hint appears next to it. Sandstone. Low density. Suitable for sanding. Dan stands up and slowly looks around. The forest no longer looks like a forest. The forest looks like a warehouse. A very large one. A very well-stocked one. And a completely free warehouse containing everything needed for life. You just have to know where to find it. He knows. 3 years in Olympic National Park. 2 years logging. 11 months running his own sawmill, which went under because Dan knew how to work with wood, but didn't know how to work with people. Here you can get around people. Wood never lies. He chooses a pine tree, not the first one he comes across, but the third from the end near the clearing. The trunk is straight. Diameter, 30 centimeters. Height to the first branches, 6 meters. The system window highlights it in green. Scots pine. Age, 40 years. Wood density, above average. Suitable for construction. Dan spits into his palm. He grips the axe with both hands and begins to chop. The rhythm comes naturally. Strike, twist, strike, twist. Golden splinters, smelling of resin, fly off to the sides. His body remembers. His muscles remember. That sound, that smell. That sensation when the blade enters the living tree at the right angle and the fibers part without resistance. The pine falls exactly where he aimed, into the gap between two neighboring trees. Not a single branch snags the neighbors. A clean cut. The system window explodes with messages. Resource obtained. Lumber. Good quality. Plus 15 experience. The Eye of the Earth skill has been upgraded. Radius. 7 meters. 15 points for one tree. He works until sunset. 7 trees. 105 experience points. Level 5. The second skill unlocks. Quality assessment. Now he sees not just a highlight on resources, but complete information. Age, density, moisture content, defects. He looks at the log at his feet and knowing that it has a hidden knot half a meter from the cut, which will make it unsuitable for a beam, but ideal for firewood. He knows this not because he studied it. He knows because the system has imprinted this knowledge into his eyes. It's getting dark. Dan builds a fire. No matches. No lighter. A flint made from 2 stones. Dry moss. Thin shavings of pine bark. A spark. Smoke. Fire. He'd warmed his hands by fires like this hundreds of times in his past life, and now it's exactly the same. The same stars, only there are more of them. The same smell of smoke. The same tiredness in his hands after a whole day with an axe. Only now there are 2 moons in the sky, and there's no turning back. Dan eats a third of his dry rations. He drinks water from his canteen. He lies down on a bed of spruce branches he chopped up in 10 minutes. He closes his eyes. Tomorrow he'll return to the clearing, not because he needs people, because people need water, and he knows where to find it. The morning dawns cold and gray. Dan wakes up at first light. His body aches, but it's a familiar ache, the ache of hard work. He washes his face in the stream. He fills his canteen to the brim. He gathers roots and greens along the bank. System messages trickle in like a light rain. +1. +1. +2. He returns to the clearing 2 hours later. The camp looks worse than yesterday. Trash. The smell of unwashed bodies. Someone broke a young tree and left it there. 3 men stand around a campfire that smokes but gives off no heat because they've thrown damp branches into it. A girl of about 20 sits by a rock, clutching her stomach. Her face is ashen. She's drinking from a puddle. Dan approaches her. Silently, he holds out the canteen. She looks up at him. Her eyes are red. She isn't. It's a fever. She takes the canteen and drinks so greedily that she chokes. Dan waits. Then he takes back the canteen and holds out a bunch of wild mint. He gestures that she should chew it. She chews. 5 minutes later, her face turns slightly pink. Dan walks on. The camp is split into small groups. There are 5 people here. 8 there. 2 here. Each group eyes the others with suspicion. Someone's backpack was stolen overnight. Someone got into a fight. One guy with a D-rank warrior class is walking around the camp announcing that he's now in charge and everyone has to listen to him. About 6 people listen to him. The rest ignore him. There's no water. The stream Dan went to yesterday is a half-hour walk away, and most people don't even know which way to go. But everyone knows there's another stream somewhere to the south. Closer. But a clan has already set up camp there, about 20 people. They call themselves the Crimson Fangs. They've taken control of the stream and are charging a fee. Want to get some water? Hand over part of your rations, or submit. Dan listens to the conversations in silence. He stands at the edge of the camp, chewing on a burdock root. He's thinking. Then he approaches the guy who was doing fire tricks yesterday. A teenager. Class. Fire Mage, rank B. Next to him is a 24-year-old Mexican with reddish stubble and a nervous laugh. Above his head is a tag, Fire Mage, rank B. This is Kevin Ortega. He's showing the teenager how to make the flame longer and thinner. They're both laughing. Dan stops nearby. Kevin turns toward him. He sees the tag, Collector, rank F, and he smirks. He says something about how there's nothing for diggers to do here. The teenager giggles. Dan doesn't react. He asks if anyone has a shovel, or at least a flat rock. Kevin laughs even louder. He asks why he needs a rock. Maybe he's going to dig a garden bed here. Dan silently picks up a flat stone from the pile by the extinguished campfire. He turns around and walks toward a dry ravine 30 paces from the edge of the camp, the very same ravine everyone had been walking past for 4 days. The earth's glow illuminates the bottom of the ravine with a soft blue light. Water, a clear underground stream, about a meter deep. Good water pressure, excellent quality. Dan starts digging. 40 minutes. The stone scrapes against the soil. Clay gets caked under his fingernails. Dan's hands are covered in mud up to his elbows. He strikes the bottom of the ravine with the stone, rhythmically and precisely. Each blow removes a layer. Sand. Dense clay. Sand again. A crowd gathers behind him. First 5 people, then 10, then 20. They stand in a semicircle and watch in silence as the kid from the worst performing class in the game digs a hole with a flat rock. Kevin Ortega stands in the front row. The smirk is still there, but it's turned a little sour. Someone asks what he's doing. Someone else replies that he's digging his own grave. Laughter. Dan doesn't turn around. At a depth of 70 centimeters, the soil changes color. It goes from gray-brown to dark. Wet. Dan slows down. He strikes more carefully. Another 20 centimeters. The sand glistens. Moisture seeps through the grains. Behind him, the chatter dies down. Someone is moving forward. 5 more strikes. Water. It rises slowly. At first, a thin film. Then faster. Cold. Clear. It's coming up from below under pressure. 10 minutes later, there's a puddle 20 centimeters deep at the bottom of the pit, and it keeps filling up. The system window flashes. Source detected. An underground spring. The water quality is excellent. Experience plus 45. Silence. Then someone says one word. Water. And the camp erupts. People rush forward. They jostle each other. Someone is already sticking a canteen into the pit. Dan stands up and steps aside. He doesn't try to give orders. He doesn't explain. He doesn't expect thanks. He walks over to his backpack. He takes out the remains of his dry rations. He eats. An hour later, there's already a line of 40 people at the well. The warrior who had declared himself the leader tries to take control of the well. He's told to get lost. The water wasn't found thanks to him, and everyone saw that. By evening, Dan heads into the forest. He needs to cut down 4 more trees before dark. The system glasses won't wait. On the morning of the 6th day, 4 canteens filled with berries are sitting next to his sleeping bag. A scrap of paper lies nearby. On it, written in clumsy pencil handwriting, is a single sentence. "I'm sorry, brother, Kevin." Dan looks at the flasks. He picks one up. He pours the berries into his palm. Blackberries, a little crushed but fresh. He puts the note in his pocket and goes to look for Kevin. He finds him by the campfire. Kevin is sitting on a log, twirling a small flame between his fingers. When he sees Dan, he jumps up. His face looks guilty. He starts saying that he was an idiot, that he shouldn't have laughed, and that Dan is a really cool guy. Dan raises his hand. Kevin falls silent. Dan asks if he knows how to keep a fire going for a long time and keep it steady. Not with bursts, but with a steady flame. Kevin blinks. He says yes, probably. Dan nods. He says he needs someone who can dry wood faster than the sun can, and that if Kevin's ready, he can be that person. Kevin stands there with his mouth open for about 3 seconds. Then he grins. But this time, different now, without mockery, with something like relief. He says that a digger is hiring a fire mage to dry planks, and that it's the craziest thing he's ever heard. Dan doesn't smile, but something warm appears in his eyes. He says the planks won't dry on their own, and they go to work. By the 8th day, Dan reaches the 10th level. The Eye of the Earth skill expands to a radius of 15 meters. The world around him glows with hints. A clay vein by the cliff. A nest of wild bees in an old oak tree 300 meters to the east. Clumps of wild garlic in the lowlands. Stones suitable for laying a foundation in the stream bed. Every resource he finds and extracts with his own hands grants him experience. Each level expands his perception. It's a virtuous cycle, and it works in only one direction, upward. While the combat classes at camp sit idle because the nearest monsters are too strong for their level, Dan levels up on the grass, on the clay, on the rocks, on the water, on the tree. He builds his first hut on the 9th day, not in the camp, but 100 meters away from it, at the edge of the forest, near the spot where the stream bends and forms a small, quiet backwater. The hut is small, 3 by 4 meters, a frame made of poles, walls of woven branches coated with clay, a roof of 3 layers of spruce branches. The floor is earthen but packed down and covered with dry pine needles. The door is made of 3 planks tied together. Inside there's a bed made of spruce branches, a hearth made of stones, a shelf for tools. The system window reports, a temporary dwelling has been built. Quality, satisfactory. Bonus, health regeneration plus 5% while resting inside. Experience plus 60. 60 points. For just one hut, a combat class would get that much for killing an elite wolf, with the risk of losing an arm. Dan gets them for spending 3 days hauling branches and mixing clay. Kevin helps. No system bonus. No experience points. Just because Dan asked, and because Kevin is bored and scared at the same time. And for some reason, he isn't as scared when he's next to Dan. On the 10th day, a woman comes to Dan's hut. She can barely stand. Her clothes are torn. Her hair is dirty and tangled. In her arms is a little girl of about 5 who isn't crying, but is simply silent, her eyes wide open. The woman is holding a boy of about 7 by the hand. The boy is limping. A system tag hovers above the woman's head. Healer, rank C. Her name is Hannah Lee, 26 years old, a pediatrician from San Francisco. She rescued these 2 children from a village 12 kilometers to the west. The village has been destroyed. Not by monsters, by people. A group of looters attacked at night. They took the food, they took the weapons. Those they didn't kill, they drove away. Hannah walked through the forest for 3 days carrying the 2 children, without food, without water. With a single healing ability that drains mana, of which she has almost none left. She stands before Dan and says she needs help. Her voice is steady. Her hands are shaking, but her voice is steady. Dan looks at her, at the children, at her hands. Then he silently steps aside and points to the hut. It's warm inside. A fire is burning in the hearth. On the shelf stands a pot with the remains of porridge made from crushed root and wild garlic. Hannah leads the children inside. She seats them by the fire. She picks up the pot. She feeds them first. Then she eats herself. Her hands are still shaking, but she holds the spoon firmly. A professional habit. Surgeons don't drop their instruments. Dan stands outside. He looks at the forest. Kevin approaches from the side and quietly asks what they're going to do. Dan is silent for a long time. Then he says they need a second hut, and a third one, and that tomorrow they'll start building a smokehouse because the rations will run out in 2 days and there are more people now. Kevin asks if he knows how to build a smokehouse. Dan says yes. He built 14 of them in his past life. 3 of them are still standing in Olympic National Park, if that park still exists. Kevin doesn't ask what he means. On the morning of the 11th day, Dan starts building. The second cabin is for Hannah and the kids. The third will serve as a storage shed, the smokehouse by the stream. He chops wood, hauls it, planes it, kneads clay. Kevin dries the boards over a fire. After a night's rest, Hannah gets up and silently begins to help. Not with building, she doesn't know how, but she knows how to organize the space. She arranges the stones for the smokehouse foundation in a straight line. She sorts the branches by thickness. She gathers moss for caulking. Dan notices how she works. Precise, methodical. No wasted movements. Just like in an operating room. By noon, 2 more people join them. A silent Korean hunter in his 30s with a D-rank tracker class, and a skinny teenager around 16 with an E-rank artisan class. A teenager. His name is Tom Brennan, an Irishman. He ended up here straight from history class. The last thing he remembers is falling off his chair and everyone laughing, and then he woke up in the woods. Tom stands in front of Dan and says he has the artisan class, and that he has no idea what that means. Dan looks at his hands. Long fingers, no calluses, but his fingers are nimble. He's seen fingers like that on woodcarvers. Dan hands him a knife and a piece of soft pine. He tells him to carve a spoon, any kind, whatever he can manage. Tom takes the knife hesitantly. He sits down on a log. And 2 hours later he brings over a spoon. A crooked one, with an uneven handle. But a spoon. A functional spoon you can use to eat soup. The system window above Tom's head flashes. Skill unlocked. Wood carving. Level 1. Tom looks at the message, then at the spoon, then at Dan. His eyes grow very wide. Dan takes the spoon. He examines it. He says it's not bad for a first try, but that the bowl is too shallow and that linden wood would be better. And then he says they'll need 10 spoons like this tomorrow, and 20 stakes for the palisade. Tom nods with such expression as if he'd just been handed an award. The hunter's name is Chong. Just Chong. He doesn't give his last name. He doesn't talk about his past. He heads into the woods at dawn and returns in the evening with 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder. Silently, he sets them down by the fire. Silently, he sits down. Silently, he eats his portion. Dan and Chong don't talk. They don't need to. They're both the kind of people who understand each other by the way the other walks through the woods. By the 12th day, Dan's camp is no longer just a makeshift stopover. 3 huts, a working smokehouse, 4 rabbits and bundles of herbs hang inside, a supply of water in 3 canteens, and a clay jug that Dan molded and fired in the fire. An invisible perimeter made of thin ropes and stakes. Chong stretched them between the trees. If anything larger than a dog crosses the line, it will fall and clatter stone against stone. A simple system. It works. Hannah is bandaging Tom's cut finger. Tom is carving out a 4th spoon. Kevin is sitting by the fire, roasting roots, and telling a story about how he once set a microwave on fire at work. Dan stands at the edge of the camp and looks toward the main clearing. There are still over 100 people there. No walls, no supplies, no system. Soon they'll start coming here, not because Dan will call them, but because it smells of smoked meat and smoke from the working smokehouse. And that smell carries far through the forest. They start arriving on the 13th day. First in pairs, then in threes. Hungry and quiet. They stand at the edge of the camp and look at the smokehouse, at the huts, at the jug of water sitting on a stump by the entrance. Dan doesn't chase anyone away, but he doesn't call them over either. He just works. He chops wood. He planes a board. He mixes clay for a new hearth. Anyone who wants to eat can help. Anyone who helps gets a portion of smoked rabbit and hot herbal tea. Anyone who doesn't want to help can leave. No one leaves. By the 15th day, there are 22 people in the camp. Dan doesn't count them. Hannah does that. She's kept a record. Names, grades, ranks, injuries, allergies. She writes everything down on strips of birch bark with a charcoal stick. Dan notices that she writes in small, neat handwriting, just like in a medical chart. A habit. He notices something else, too. Hannah's hands are cold. Even by the campfire, she holds her palms close to the flames and periodically rubs her fingers together. A surgeon can't have cold hands. On the 16th day, Dan brings her a pair of gloves. Not gloves in the usual sense. Scraps of rabbit skin, roughly sewn together but tailored to the size of her palms. With open fingertips so she can work without taking them off. Hannah takes the gloves, puts them on, looks at her hands, then at Dan. He's already gone over to the smokehouse. She stands there with the gloves on and can't move for a few seconds. Then she pulls them on tighter and goes back to work. The trouble starts on the 18th day. 4 men from the main camp arrive, not for food. Their leader is a big guy with a C-rank berserker class. He announces that Dan's camp is now part of his group, that resources must be distributed centrally, and that whoever finds water and food must share with those who protect everyone. He doesn't say this as a suggestion. He says it as a fact. Behind him are 3 others. 1 has a sword. 2 have clubs. Dan stands in front of the smokehouse with an axe in his hands. Not a battle axe, but a work axe. A rusty one. The very same one he started with. He listens to the berserker until the end. He doesn't interrupt. Then he asks one thing. He asks how many walls the berserker has built. Silence. The berserker doesn't understand the question. Dan asks again. How many huts? How many smokehouses? How many wells? How many spoons did he carve? How much clay did he mix? Because everything here was made by the hands of specific people. And those people are standing right here. Kevin gets up from the log. The fire on his palms is quiet but noticeable. Chong steps out from behind a tree with a bow. He isn't aiming. He's just standing there. But the arrow is already knocked. Even Tom is standing nearby with a knife in his hand. A carving knife. Small. Not very intimidating. But Tom is standing there. Berserk looks around. He takes stock. He realizes there are 4 of them, but more people here. And that the skinny Korean guy with the bow is staring right at his throat. He says it won't end like this. He turns around. He walks away. His 3 companions follow him. Kevin exhales so loudly that the whole camp can hear him. He says he almost threw up from fear. Dan slings his axe over his shoulder. He says they need a palisade. Today. They've been building the palisade for 3 days. 20 people. Dan chops wood. Kevin dries it. Tom whittles the stakes. Hannah organizes the transport of clay from the stream. Chong stands guard because the berserker might return and bring his friends. The palisade isn't pretty. The stakes are of varying heights. The gaps between them are a finger's width thick. The gate is simply 2 poles inserted into notches, but it's a wall. Their first wall. The system window reports, defensive structure built, palisade. Quality, below average. Bonus. Damage from physical attacks during a siege reduced by -10%. Experience plus 200. 200 points. Dan advances to level 17. A new skill is unlocked. Expanded inventory. Spatial storage. Initial capacity, 1 cubic meter. This changes everything. He can store resources inside system space. No weight, no deterioration, no risk of theft. He stands by the palisade he just finished and looks at his hands. Hands covered in calluses, scraped raw, coated in resin and clay. 16 days ago, these hands were gripping the pickup steering wheel a second before it hit the water. Now they've built a wall. He clenches and unclenches his fists. He heads inside. He needs to finish the 4th hut before dark. Day 22. Dan is on the 15th level. The Eye of the Earth operates within a 25-meter radius. It sees resources that no one else can see. A mushroom bed beneath the roots of an old oak. A vein of flint in a ravine beyond the stream. A nest of wild bees 8 meters up in a crevice of a dead tree. Honey. Real honey. He climbs the tree using a ladder he made from birch bark and wet moss. Kevin stands below, joking very nervously that if Dan falls, he'll set him on fire right there so he won't suffer. Dan pulls out the honeycombs. 3 kilograms of honey. Dark, thick, smelling of flowers he doesn't recognize. System window. Resource obtained. Wild honey. Excellent quality. Medicinal properties. Antiseptic. Accelerates wound healing. Unlimited shelf life. Experience plus 35. Dan climbs down from the tree. His face is covered in bee stings. His left eye is almost swollen shut. He walks silently over to Hannah and places the honeycomb in front of her. He tells her it's an antiseptic. A natural one. She no longer needs to wash her wounds with just boiling water. Hannah looks at the honey, then at his swollen face. For the first time in the 12 days she's been at the camp, she laughs. Quietly. Briefly. But she laughs. She says he needs to put something cold on his eye. Dan says he needs to finish the roof on the 5th hut. Hannah says the roof can wait. She takes his hand. Leads him to the stream. He lets her. Night of the 22nd day. 4 lone marauders approach the palisade from the south. They don't know about Chong's ropes. The first one catches the twine with his foot. A stone falls. A sound. Chong wakes up before the stone hits the ground. An arrow flies into the darkness. A scream. Kevin runs out of the cabin and hurls a fireball toward the scream. The forest flares up for a second. In that flash, Dan sees them. 4 of them. One is already on the ground with an arrow in his thigh. 3 of them freeze. They aren't prepared to fight back. They were after easy prey. Smoked meat. Tools. Maybe women. They didn't expect an arrow in the dark or fire in their faces. The fight lasts less than a minute. Kevin creates a wall of fire between the Marauders and the palisade. Chong fires a second arrow. The Marauders run. The one with the arrow in his hip crawls after them. No one dies. Dan stands in the gate and watches as the darkness swallows their figures. Then he turns to Kevin. He says that the wall of fire is good, but that it consumes too much mana, and that Kevin needs to learn how to make fire mines. Small ones. Hidden in the ground, that go off when someone approaches. Kevin blinks. He says he didn't know that was possible. Dan says it is. Dan doesn't know if it's possible, but he knows Kevin will believe him and give it a try. And that a guy who can create fire out of nothing has enough talent to figure out how to put that fire into the ground. 3 days later, Kevin makes his first fire mine. A small hole in the ground filled with dry pine needles and loaded with a tiny fire projectile. It's pressure activated. It doesn't kill, but it burns the leg and creates a flash that blinds for 5 seconds. Perfect for the perimeter. A system window notifies Kevin. Skill unlocked. Fire trap, level 1. Kevin looks at his system message, then at Dan, then back again. He says that Dan literally invented a new skill for him. Dan shrugs, says he didn't invent it but simply hypothesized it. Kevin stares at him for a long time. Then he says quietly and seriously that Dan is the strangest person he's ever met, and that he's glad Dan is on his side. Day 30. The camp isn't a camp anymore. Dan stands on a hill east of the stream and looks down. 8 huts, a smokehouse, a herb drying shed, a workshop shed where Tom carves stakes and handles from morning till night, a palisade that they've doubled in height. Now it's 2 meters high and encircles the entire area, including the stream. 31 people live within the perimeter. Outside, rumors are circulating through the forest. Somewhere in the western forest, there's a place where they're fed, where there are walls, where they aren't beaten. The rumors travel far. Dan is on the 21st level. His Eye of the Earth covers a radius of 40 meters. His quality assessment works flawlessly. He knows the forest like the back of his hand. He knows every tree within a kilometer's radius. He knows where the clay is best, where the stone is strongest, where mushrooms grow after the rain. His spatial inventory has expanded to 2 cubic meters. Inside are planks, logs, flint blanks, bundles of dried herbs, and a week's supply of smoked meat. He gathered all of this himself. Every resource has passed through his hands. The Rich Vein skill activated at level 18. Quietly, without warning. He was chopping down an ordinary pine tree when a piece of something dark fell out of the heartwood. Heavy, with a metallic sheen. System window. Rare resource obtained. Ironwood. Extremely high density, suitable for crafting tools and weapons. Strength exceeds that of low-grade steel. Dan held the piece in the palm of his hand and examined it for 5 minutes. Then he put it in his inventory. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. On the 32nd day, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. Not 2 or 3 people emerged from the forest. 12 people. Women. Children. An old man. 2 wounded men being carried on a makeshift stretcher. Their village, 5 kilometers to the south, had been burned down. Not the monsters. The Crimson Fangs clan is expanding its territory. They're taking everything. Food, weapons, people who can fight. The rest are being driven out. Or worse. The woman leading the group is short, with a stern face and a broken nose. She says they've been walking here for 2 days, that they lost 3 more along the way, that one of the wounded men on the stretcher won't make it until morning without help. Dan at her. At the people behind her. At the children standing quietly, not crying because they've forgotten how. He opens the gate. Hannah is already running toward the stretcher. She doesn't wait for orders. She sees blood and acts. The wounded man. A laceration on his left side. Dirty, inflamed. The edges are gray. Hannah examines the wound by the light of the campfire. Her expression doesn't change, but Dan sees her clench her jaw. In her past life, this would have been treated for $40 at a pharmacy. An antibiotic, a sterile bandage, a stitch in the treatment room. Here, she has none of that. Dan steps closer. He places next to her a jar of honey, a bundle of dried willow bark, strips of clean cloth that he'd cut from his spare shirt and boiled, a small knife, scorched black in the flame. Hannah looks at all of this, then at Dan. He says that willow bark is salicylate, a natural equivalent of aspirin. Honey is an antiseptic. The cloth is sterile. The knife has been sterilized. He doesn't know this from the system. He knows this because he lived in the woods for 3 years, where the nearest hospital was a 4-hour drive away, and learned to treat himself. Hannah takes the knife. Her hands aren't shaking anymore. She works for 40 minutes. She cleans the wound. She washes it with honey. She applies willow bark as a compress. She bandages it. The wounded man groans but doesn't scream. By morning, his fever has gone down. He'll live. Hannah sits by his bedside until dawn. When Dan brings her a mug of hot herbal tea, she takes it with both hands, still wearing those same rabbit skin gloves. She drinks slowly. She doesn't say a word. But she doesn't take her eyes off Dan while he stands there. Day 35. 43 people. The camp is bursting at the seams. There isn't enough food. Chong hunts every day, but rabbits and squirrels can't feed 40 mouths. They need fish. They need fields. They need flour, or at least something like it. Dan heads into the forest for the whole day. Alone. His eyes are at maximum sensitivity. He combs through an area within a 3-kilometer radius. He searches. He finds a clearing 1 kilometer to the north, sunny, sheltered from the wind by a hill to the east. Soil. The system window shows fertile loam. The humus layer is 30 centimeters deep. pH is neutral, suitable for growing root vegetables and grains. Near the clearing is a ravine. It contains top-quality clay. Beyond the ravine is a flint outcrop. Beyond the flint, on the bank of the stream, lies a scattering of stones with a dull reddish sheen. Dan picks one up. System window. Copper ore. Copper content, 12%. Enough to smelt at a temperature of 1080 degrees. He stands in this clearing and slowly turns in place. The clearing. Clay. Flint. Copper. Water nearby. Forest all around. Everything needed to build not just a camp, but a settlement. A real one. A permanent one. He returns in the evening. He gathers Kevin, Hannah, Chon, and Tom. He tells them what he found. Kevin asks if they're going to move. Dan says no. They'll expand. This camp will become the southern outpost. The new clearing will be the center. Between them is a trail a kilometer long, then a road. Then maybe something bigger. Hannah asks what they'll call this place. Dan is silent. He hadn't thought about it. Tom says there are a lot of cedars around. Kevin says they're by a stream, which flows into a river, which looks like a dock. Dan looks at Kevin. Kevin shrugs. He says he just said whatever came to mind. Cedar Dock. No one votes. No one argues. The name just fits this place like a key in a lock. From this day on, they're building not a camp, but a home. Day 38. The first foundation on the new clearing. Dan personally digs the trench for the foundation of the longhouse, 12 meters by 6. He hauls the stones for the foundation from the stream. Each stone undergoes a quality check. This one's good. This one isn't. A crack. This one's perfect. He lays the stones tightly together. He fills the gaps with clay mixed with fine gravel. Tom carves tenons and mortises into the beams for the frame. His carving skill is already at level 4. His hands have grown stronger. Calluses have appeared. He no longer looks like a schoolboy. Kevin is drying the logs in batches. His control over the fire has become more precise. He can maintain the temperature exactly at the right level for 10 minutes straight. Before, he could only manage 3. Chong brings meat. Every day. 2 rabbits. Sometimes 3. Once he brought back a roe deer. A small one. 20 kilograms. There was enough meat to last everyone 2 days. Dan processed the hide himself. He skinned it, stretched it on a frame, covered it with a mixture of ash and salt. There's not much salt. There's almost none. That's a problem. Dan knows that without salt, the meat won't keep. Without salt, people will start getting sick. Without salt, there won't be proper preservation. He starts searching. His eyes scan every meter within range. 3 days of searching. On the 4th day, he finds it. A small outcrop half a kilometer to the west. A whitish coating on the rocks at the base of the cliff. He scrapes it off with a knife, tastes it on his tongue. Salt. Rock salt. Low quality, with impurities, but salt. The system window confirms it. Rock salt. Below average quality. Suitable for canning after purification. Experience plus 20. He extracts 3 kilograms in 2 hours. He carries it back to camp. Hannah purifies the salt following his instructions. Dissolve in water. Strain it through a cloth. Boil it down over the fire. The crystals left at the bottom of the pot are small and white. Pure. Tom tastes them on the tip of his tongue, and his face stretches in surprise. He says it tastes better than any salt he's ever eaten in Ireland. Kevin says Tom hasn't eaten real salt because he's Irish. Tom throws a wood shaving at Kevin. Kevin dodges it and laughs. Hannah shakes her head, but the corners of her mouth twitch. Dan stands off to the side and watches them. These people who, a month ago, were strangers to one another. The boy who became a woodcarver. The mage who became the furnace. At the hunter who became a guardian. At the doctor who became the heart of the camp. At himself, who has become something he never wanted to be. He turns away and goes to chop wood. Day 43. 7 people arrive at Cedar Harbor at once. Former members of a small clan destroyed by the Crimson Fangs. Among them are a man with the D-rank Mason class and a woman with the E-rank Herbalist class. The Mason. Dan looks at him. He looks at the unfinished foundation of the longhouse. He looks back. He asks if the man knows how to lay stone and mortar. The Mason says that the system gives him a bonus to the strength of his masonry, and that he has already built 3 furnaces in his former camp. Dan nods. He shows him the foundation. He says it needs to be finished before the first wave. The Mason asks what kind of wave. Dan pauses. For the first time during this conversation, his expression changes. He explains. The system message that everyone received on the first day, but that most ignored. The wave. A monster migration. Once every 100 days. The first one in 19 days. The Mason turns pale. Dan says the walls need to be finished before then. All of them, and that they'll need a lot of mortar. Day 45. A girl emerges from the forest onto the northern trail. Alone. 2 swords on her back. Her clothes are covered in blood, not her own. Her face is beautiful even under a layer of dirt and dried blood spatter. Her eyes are black and vicious, like a cat cornered, knowing that the next person to reach out will lose their fingers. System tag. Blade Dancer. Rank A. This is Ji-Ah Sun, 22 years old. A former trainee at an idol agency in Seoul. A former captive of the Crimson Fangs clan. Now a fugitive. She stands at the gates of Circuit Harbor and looks at the palisade. At the huts. At the smoke rising from the smokehouse. At the people walking inside who aren't shouting or fighting. Her hand is on the hilt of her sword. Chon is the first to notice her. He's standing on a watch stump by the gate and just stares for 3 seconds. Then he quietly calls out to Dan. Dan approaches the gate. He sees the girl. He sees the blood on her clothes. He sees how she's standing, knees slightly bent, ready to pounce. Like a fighter who's used to the fact that any door could be a trap. He stops 3 steps away from her, no closer. She says that if anyone tries to touch her, she'll slit their throat. Her voice is hoarse. Not from screaming, from thirst. Dan nods. He says he won't touch her. Then he turns toward the hut. He calls out to Tom. He asks him to bring a bowl of soup and a flask of water. Tom brings them. Dan sets the bowl and flask on the ground in front of her. Then he takes a step back. J.A. looks at the soup. At Dan. At the soup. She's waiting for a catch. Waiting for conditions. Waiting for words like, "What will you give me in return?" Dan turns silently and walks back to the unfinished wall. He picks up the axe. He starts chopping at a log. Ji-Ah stands there for another minute. Then she sits down on the ground right by the gate. She picks up the bowl. She eats. Her hands are shaking. The soup is hot and has real meat in it. Smoked rabbit, wild garlic, root vegetables. She eats and tears stream down her cheeks. She doesn't notice. Or she pretends not to notice. That evening, Dan brings her a key. Not a key in the usual sense. A wooden bolt for the door of a separate hut. A small one. The one farthest from the entrance. With its own window and its own hearth. He says it's her home. That the bolt locks from the inside. That no one will enter without her permission. She takes the bolt. Turns it over in her hands. Stares at Dan for a long time, a puzzled look on her face. Then she goes into the hut and closes the door. Dan hears the bolt click shut from the inside. He stands outside for a few more seconds. Then he walks over to Kevin. He says they have a new fighter, rank A, 2 swords, and that she should be treated like glass preventing to be steel. Kevin asks what that means. Dan says it means not to bother her until she's ready. Kevin nods. He isn't the smartest guy in the harbor, but he can tell when Dan is serious. For 3 days, J.A. doesn't leave the cabin. They bring her food and set it by the door. They knock and leave. She opens the door when the footsteps fade away. She takes the food. She closes the door. On the 4th day, she steps outside. She stands in the doorway. She watches the people work. Tom is cutting wood. Kevin is drying planks. Hannah is bandaging the hand of a mason who's scraped his palm. The children are playing by the stream. No one is yelling. No one is hitting anyone. No one is looking at her as if she were an object. J.A. stands on the threshold of her hut and watches all day. On the 5th day, she approaches Dan. He's planing a board for a shelf. She asks if there's any work for her. Dan doesn't look up. He asks what she can do besides wielding swords. She remains silent. Then she says she can dance. Dan stops. He looks up. He looks at her. He says that evenings are boring for them, and that if she wants to, she can teach people to dance. By the campfire. When the work is done. If she wants to. Gia looks at him as if he'd said something in a foreign language. Then she turns and walks away. Dan returns to the drawing board. Another week passes. Day 52. 10 days until the wave. Dan works 16 hours a day. Walls, walls, walls. A new palisade around the expanded territory. 3 meters high. The stakes are sharpened at the top. The gaps are filled with clay and stone. Double gates. Outer and inner gates, with a space between them where anyone who breaks through can be herded. It wasn't his idea. It was Chong's idea. He explained it without words, simply by drawing it with a stick on the ground. Dan looked at the drawing and nodded. They understood each other in 10 seconds. A tower. 1. Wooden. 6 meters tall. With a platform at the top for a lookout and for Kevin, who can fire from there up to 50 meters. A moat. Shallow. 1 meter deep. But filled with sharpened stakes at the bottom. Any monster that falls in will break its legs. Kevin's traps are set all around the perimeter. 24 fire mines. Not all of them go off, roughly 1 in 3. But the ones that do produce a flash that blinds and startles. Dan is on the 24th level. His inventory is 3 cubic meters. He carries in his pocket as much wood and stone as would fill 3 carts. His hands never stop. He planes and chops and mixes and hauls and stacks and burns and sharpens and cuts. He falls asleep in the workshop and wakes up in the workshop. Hannah comes to him on the 53rd day. She says he'll kill himself if he doesn't sleep. He says there are 9 days until the wave and that the wall on the eastern flank isn't finished. She says the wall can wait 6 hours. He says the monsters won't wait. She takes his hand. For the second time. The first time was by the stream when she was treating his face after the bee sting. Back then, it was like she was a doctor. Not now. She's just holding his hand and saying nothing. Dan looks at their hands, then at her. Then he closes his eyes. 4 hours, he says. She nods. He falls asleep a minute later, right on the workbench. She covers him with a blanket and sits beside him while he sleeps. Day 55. Gia goes out for training for the first time. She does it at dawn when she thinks no one is watching. The clearing behind the huts. 2 swords. She moves. No, she dances. The blades trace patterns in the air that have nothing to do with rough fencing. This is something else. Each movement flows seamlessly into the next. Every turn is as precise as a metronome's beat. Her feet barely touch the ground. The swords whistle. The morning light catches the blades and scatters glints across the tree trunks. This isn't a fight. It's art. 6 years in the Idol Agency's training hall. 10 hours of choreography a day. A body that remembers every beat of every melody she's ever been taught. Only now, her hands aren't holding a fan or a microphone. Her hands are holding steel. Kevin stands around the corner of the hut, staring with his mouth agape. He's forgotten to breathe. Then he steps on a branch. A crunch. Ji-ah freezes. She turns around. Her eyes are sharp. Kevin raises his hands. He says he was just walking by, that he didn't see anything, that he's moving on right now. He turns and walks away at a brisk pace. He stumbles over a rock. He curses under his breath. He walks away even faster. Ji-ah watches him go. For the first time in 45 days, something other than anger flashes across her face. Something small and fleeting. Almost a smile. Almost. Day 58. 4 days until the wave. Dan gathers everyone together. 47 people. He stands on the step of the longhouse and looks at them. He's not used to speaking to a crowd. His voice isn't loud. It isn't commanding. He speaks quietly, and people lean forward to hear him. He says that in 4 days the wave will come, that it's a migration of monsters, that it wipes out any settlement without walls or preparations, that thousands of those who started out on this continent have already perished, that the harbor is ready. Not perfect, but it's ready. The walls stand. Traps are set. There's a 3-week supply of food. Water is inside the perimeter. The infirmary is equipped. Everyone knows their place. He says he's not going to lie. It'll be scary. Some may die. He can't guarantee that. But he can guarantee that he personally selected every log in these walls, that every stone in the foundation passed through his hands, that this land is theirs, not because they conquered it, but because they built it. And he says that after the wave, there will be breakfast. Silence. Then Kevin snorts. Then someone laughs. Then everyone laughs. Not out of humor, out of relief. A man who promises breakfast after the end of the world is a man who believes the end of the world can be survived. Day 61. The eve of the wave. Dan walks around the walls one last time, checks every seam, every stake, every trap. Kevin walks with him. He's silent. For the first time in 2 months, Kevin isn't joking. They stop at the eastern wall, the most vulnerable one. Dan runs his hand over the logs. The wood is warm from the sun, sturdy. He chose each of these trees himself. He knows the age of each one, its density, the number of knots. He knows this wall as well as a surgeon knows a patient. Kevin asks quietly, "Will they hold?" Dan doesn't answer right away. Then he says the walls will hold. He's confident in them. Kevin asks what he isn't sure about. Dan is silent for a long time. Then he says he isn't sure of himself. That every morning he wakes up and sees 47 people who, for some reason, have decided that he knows what he's doing. But he doesn't know. He's a lumberjack. He's no hero, no commander, no strategist. He's a guy who knows how to chop down trees and build a fire. And for some reason, everyone decided that's enough. Kevin stands nearby. He listens. Then he says that when he saw Dan on the first day, he thought this quiet Asian guy from the bottom of the class would be the first to die. But then Dan dug up water from dry ground and built a house out of sticks and found honey at the top of a dead tree and never once asked for anything in return. Kevin says that Dan isn't a hero. He's right about that. Heroes kill monsters and get glory, but Dan makes spoons. And that's exactly why people followed him. Because to a hungry person, a spoon is more important than a sword. Dan stands by the wall and says nothing. Then he places his hand on a log. He tells Kevin they need to sharpen the stakes by the eastern moat. Kevin grins. He says there's a boss, and they go to work. The night before the wave, the camp is awake. Bonfires burn all along the perimeter. Kevin is in the tower. Chong is on the wall with a bow. J.A. is sitting by the gate, swords on her lap. Her eyes are closed. But she isn't asleep. She's listening. Hannah is in the infirmary. She's laying out bandages. Honey, willow bark, clean cloths, scorched knives. Tom is next to her, pale. His hands are shaking. But he cuts the strips of cloth evenly, because Hannah taught him, and because his hands remember how to cut even when his mind is screaming with fear. Dan stands in the center of the harbor, alone. He looks up at the stars. 2 moons, white and blue. It's quiet. So quiet that you can hear the resin crackling in the bonfires. Somewhere far to the south, a muffled, low sound, like distant thunder. But the sky is clear. It's not thunder, it's the wave coming. The earth trembles. Dan feels it through the soles of his feet before he hears it with his ears. A faint vibration comes from below, from the depths, as if something enormous is waking up beneath the forest and rolling over onto its other side. Then the sound comes, a crackling. Not a single crack, a continuous roar. Hundreds of trees snap at once somewhere to the south, 3 or 4 kilometers away. A wave rolls through the forest like a tide through the reeds. Kevin on the tower shouts that he sees movement. The forest is stirring. The tops of the pine trees are swaying even though there's no wind. Something is breaking through the thicket. A lot of it. A system window flashes up for every player at the same time. Attention! The first wave has begun. The monster migration will last 72 hours. All players are advised to take cover behind fortifications. 72 hours, 3 days. Dan closes the window and looks at the walls. They'll hold out for 3 days. He knows every log. He knows where the weak spots are. He knows where repairs will be needed first. He assigned people to their posts yesterday. Kevin is on the tower, long-range fire. Chan is on the east wall, arrows. Jia is at the gate. If anything breaks through, she'll be the first to face it. Greg the Mason and 3 men with spears are on the north wall. Hannah is in the infirmary with Tom. Everyone else is inside. Women, children, the wounded, the old man. They're sitting in the longhouse, waiting. The first creature emerges from the forest 20 minutes after it begins. A wolf, but not a wolf. It has a wolf's body, but is the size of a calf. Its fur is gray-green. Its eyes are cloudy and yellow. Something dark drips from its mouth. It isn't running toward the gate. It's running past it. The wave isn't an attack. It's panic. The monsters are fleeing from something chasing them. They aren't deliberately attacking the walls. They're just running and knocking down everything in their path. The first wolf falls into the moat. The stakes pierce its front legs. It howls. A second one follows. A third one goes around the moat but steps on Kevin's fire mine. A flash. A screech. The creature jerks to the side and crashes into the palisade. The stakes creak but hold. Dan stands by the inner gate and counts. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20. An hour later, there are already 100 of them. They're crashing into the walls not because they want to get inside, but because they're running and the walls are in their way. Every blow reverberates through the logs. Dan feels every impact in his palms as he presses his hands against the palisade. The eastern wall, the third stake on the left. It's wobbling. Dan runs over. He pulls a pre-prepared log from his inventory. He drives in the support. He wedges it in with a rock. From above, Kevin rains down fire. Not a steady stream, short, precise bursts. He's conserving mana. Each burst knocks 2 or 3 creatures away from the wall. Chong shoots methodically. 1 arrow, 1 creature. He never misses. He has 24 arrows. After 24 shots, he climbs down from the wall and collects the arrows from the corpses. He climbs back up. He shoots again. Jia stands at the gate and waits. Her swords are drawn. Her face is calm. Waiting is worse for her than fighting. But Dan told her to stand at the gate. And she stands. Not because he's the commander, because his plan makes sense, and she can see that. At the 3rd hour, a breach. The north wall. 3 creatures break through the section between 2 rings. Greg the Mason meets the first one with a spear to the snout. The second one leaps over him. Dan sees this from a distance of 30 meters. He runs. Not with a sword. With a sledgehammer that Tom carved from ironwood. Heavy. Clumsy. Not a weapon. A tool. A creature the size of a German shepherd, with fangs as long as a finger, lands in front of him. Dan strikes from above. 1 blow. The ironwood sledgehammer hits the skull. A crunch. The creature falls. The system window is silent. No experience points for the kill. He's a collector, not a warrior. The system doesn't count this as his job. But the creature is dead, and that's all that matters. A third creature darts past him. GA appears out of nowhere. 2 swings. The creature falls in 2 halves. Clean. Fast. Not a single wasted movement. She doesn't look at Dan. She's already running back toward the gate. Dan plugs the gap in the wall. 2 planks from his inventory. Clay, stones. 10 minutes. The wall stands. The first night. The longest night in the history of Cedar Harbor. The monsters come in waves. 10 minutes of lull. Then 20 minutes of onslaught. Then silence again. Then more blows against the walls. Kevin keeps casting until his mana runs out. Then he sits on the tower and drinks water while his mana regenerates. Then he goes all out again. Chong fires all his arrows twice. By the third time, half are broken. He fires the ones that are left. Greg gets a laceration on his forearm. Hannah pulls him off the wall and drags him to the infirmary. She cleans the wound. Honey. Willow bark. A bandage. She sends him back to the wall after an hour. Greg walks back without complaining. Tom stands in the infirmary next to Hannah, cutting bandages. His hands are shaking, but he cuts straight. Dan doesn't go out onto the wall. He works inside, repairing, propping up, replacing broken stakes, bringing water to the fighters. He brings arrows to Chan. He distributes food. He's the go-between. He's the connecting thread. Without him, the wall wouldn't stand because no one else knows which log needs to be propped up first, where the spare beam is, or which stake has already cracked from the inside and will break in an hour. Dawn of the first day of the wave. The harbor courtyard is littered with the carcasses of creatures. The stench, blood, mud. But the walls stand. Everyone is alive. Everyone. Dan stands at the gate and looks out at the forest. Trees have been felled in a strip 100 meters from the walls. The ground is rutted. But beyond that, the forest stands. Green, quiet, as if nothing had happened. He knows this is a lull, that the main wave will arrive by evening, that the second night will be worse than the first. He turns to Kevin. He tells everyone to take turns resting. 4 hours of sleep, then switch shifts, and for someone to start butchering the carcasses. Meat, bones, hides, everything goes into the effort. Kevin looks at him, asks if he's serious right now. They've just survived a night of nightmares, and Dan is thinking about hides. Dan says the hides will be needed to insulate the walls before winter, and that the bones can be ground up into fertilizer for future garden beds. Kevin closes his eyes, opens. He says Dan is impossible. Then he goes to organize the butchering. The second night is worse. Dan was right. There are more creatures. They're bigger. Among the wolves, creatures resembling boars appear, but with bony growths on their skulls. They ram the walls like battering rams. The southern section takes 3 hits and begins to list. Dan runs over there with 3 men. They brace their shoulders against the logs from the inside while the boar rams from the outside. A blow. A blow. A blow. Every blow reverberates through his spine. Dan grits his teeth. He holds on. Kevin throws a fireball from the tower. The boar screeches and runs off to the side. Dan falls to his knees. He gets back up. He grabs a log. He repairs the wall. The third night, the last one. By now, everyone is at their limit. Kevin has lost his voice from shouting and giving orders. Chan is even quieter than usual. He's run out of arrows and is standing on the wall with a knife. Greg is sitting by the infirmary with fresh bandages on both arms, staring at a single point. Hannah hasn't slept for 3 days. Her eyes are red and hollow, but her hands are still working. She's bandaged 11 people. Not a single one has died, not a single one. This is her victory, quiet and invisible to everyone except Dan. He sees her. Gia is on the wall. She went up there on the second night when it became clear the gates might not hold. She stands on the palisade like a dancer on stage. Every creature that tries to climb over the wall meets 2 blades. She moves so fast that Kevin from the tower sees only glints on the blades. In 2 nights, she's killed more creatures than all the other fighters combined. Her clothes are soaked through with blood. Her face is splattered with it, but her eyes are calm. This is what she does best. It's the only thing the Idol Agency's system couldn't take away from her, her ability to move. At dawn on the third day, the wave recedes, just as it came. The crackling of the trees fades northward. The ground stops shaking. Silence. True silence. Not the calm before the storm, but the end. A system window pops up for everyone. The first wave is complete. Your settlement has held out. Survival bonus. Experience tripled. The numbers flash before Dan's eyes. Level 30. 31. Inventory. 5 cubic meters. Earth's eye radius. 100 meters. The rich vein skill has been upgraded. The chance of finding a rare resource has doubled. He closes all the windows. Then he sits down on the ground right in the middle of the yard, next to the corpse of a creature that no one has cleared away yet. He closes his eyes. He breathes. A minute. 2. Then he stands up. He walks to the kitchen. Soup. Hot. In iron mugs that Tom forged from captured metal a week before the wave. The mugs are warped and heavy, but they hold the heat well. Dan pours the soup himself, a ladle in his right hand, a pot in his left. He walks around the harbor courtyard from person to person, calling each by name. Spicy for Kevin. He added pepper made from dried berries he found in the woods last week. Kevin likes it spicy. For Hannah, no salt. Salt makes her hands swell, and a surgeon can't work with swollen fingers. Greg gets a double portion because he lost blood and needs to recover. Tom gets an extra piece of bread. Flatbreads made from ground roots. Not bread in the usual sense, but the closest thing they have to bread. Tom is growing and needs carbohydrates. Chan gets his without greens. He doesn't eat grass. He never explained why. Dan didn't ask. He just remembered. For the children, something warm and soft, mashed up, so they don't burn themselves. He reaches J.A. She's sitting on the ground by the wall. Swords nearby. Her clothes are covered in blood. Her face is covered in blood. She hasn't moved since the wave subsided. She just sat down and froze. Dan sets a mug in front of her. With a double portion of meat, smoked rabbit, 2 pieces, not just one, because in 3 days, she's burned through as much energy as others use in a week. G.A. takes the mug. She stares into the soup, then at Dan. Her lips tremble. She lowers her head. She can't bring herself to look up. Dan doesn't wait. He doesn't hover over her. He moves on with the pot. Sitting by the gate is a man they picked up outside yesterday, a looter from the group that tried to break into the harbor at the height of the wave. Not out of malice, out of desperation. Their shelter was destroyed, and they had nowhere to run. 3 died. This one survived. With a shattered leg and a burn on his shoulder from Kevin's fire mine, Hannah bandaged him up. Dan walks over to him. He sets down a mug. The same portion. The same soup. The man looks up at Dan. His eyes are wet. He tries to say something. Dan has already walked away. When the pot is empty, Dan sets it on the kitchen table. He sits down on a log. He closes his eyes. 3 days without sleep. His body is aching. He can't feel his hands, but they're all alive. All 47 of them. Plus one captured looter who, in 3 days, will ask to stay. And Dan will say yes, because here, they don't ask where you came from. They ask what you can do. The next morning, Dan walks out the gate. Alone. Unarmed. With an ironwood sledgehammer slung over his shoulder, he walks along the outer wall, slowly. He runs his hand over the charred logs. His fingers trace every crack, every burn, every chip. The east corner. 3 logs need to be replaced. The south section? The support beam has cracked. The north breach has been patched, but roughly, it needs to be redone. He pulls a fresh cedar plank from his supplies, one that still smells of resin. He places it next to the burned section. He picks up his axe. The sun is rising. Above the harbor, the first smoke since the battle rises from a kitchen chimney. Someone has put the kettle on. Dan begins his work, quietly, steady, just as he's been doing all this time. A week after the wave, the world changes. Not figuratively, literally. A system message reaches everyone on the continent at the same time. The results of the first wave. Of the 15 major settlements, 7 have held out. 8 have been completely destroyed. Casualties among players. 21,000 people, dead. In 3 days. Dan reads the number, and it takes him a few seconds to grasp the scale of it. 21,000. 1 in 10. Just vanished. Because they didn't build the walls in time. Or didn't want to. Or didn't know what was needed. Kevin reads the same message, and his face goes pale. He quietly says a single number. 21,000. And he falls silent. For the first time in 2 months, he has no jokes. Dan looks at the walls of the harbor. at the crooked palisade, at the tower that tilted slightly after the second night, at the gate held together by a promise and 3 oak pegs. It saved 47 lives. Crooked, uneven, made from whatever was available, but alive, standing, functional. He clenches and unclenches his fists. Then he goes back to building. In the weeks that follow, people begin arriving at the harbor. Not in 2s and 3s as before, but by the dozens. The wave destroyed the weaker settlements, and the survivors are heading to where the walls have stood firm. Word of Cedar Pier spreads along the trails and roads. A place where the walls are intact, where there is food, where the wounded are treated, where no one is beaten. Dan welcomes everyone. Everyone. But he tells everyone the same thing. Here, you have to work. Those who don't work eat last. No one refuses. By the end of the 3rd month, there are 70 people at the harbor. Dan is on the 36th level. He opens the first mine in the 4th month, a vein of copper ore that he'd found back on the 35th day. He digs it himself, the first 3 meters down. Then he widens the tunnel. He installs supports made of oak beams. He selects each beam based on a systematic assessment. Only the highest density. Only those without hidden defects. The mine is small, narrow. 2 people can't pass each other, but the ore keeps coming. Every piece mined by Dan's hands grants experience. Every 10th piece, from the rich vein, turns out to be slightly richer than it should be. A little more copper, sometimes an impurity of tin. Once, a tiny crystal that the system identifies as energy quartz. He doesn't know what to do with it. He puts it in his inventory. He'll figure it out later. In the 4th month, Sarah Magnuson arrives, 29 years old, a mechanical engineer from Minneapolis, a B-rank artifactor. Red-headed, hefty, loud. With calloused hands and oil stains on her face, even though there isn't a single working engine on the entire continent. She's found a way to get her hands dirty. She doesn't come alone. 8 people follow her. The remnants of a clan of engineers who were wiped out not by monsters but by another clan. They took their territory. They took their resources. They left the people behind. Sarah is carrying a wooden box on her back. Inside the box are tools. Real ones. A hammer with an iron head. Pliers. A file. 3 chisels. It's a treasure. On a continent where most people work with stone tools, an iron hammer is worth as much as an entire camp. She sets the box down in front of Dan. She opens the lid. She says she has tools and blueprints for a watermill, and that she needs a place where her work won't be stolen. Dan looks at the tools, then at her. Then at the blueprints she's unfolding right on the ground. A blueprint of a mill, a water wheel, a transmission mechanism, millstones. Everything is drawn in charcoal on bark, but with dimensions and annotations. Competently, precisely, just like an engineering drawing. He asks her name. She says Sarah Magnuson. He says a plot near the upper crossing of the stream, where the elevation drop is 1.5 meters, would suit her, and that he'll help lay the foundation tomorrow. Sarah blinks. She had expected negotiations, terms, demands to make the tools available for shared use. But he simply said tomorrow. She asks what her share will be. Dan says, share? It's her mill, her drawing, her work. The pier will provide materials and labor. The mill will be registered in her name. Sarah stands with her mouth open. Then she closes it. Then she opens it again. She says he's strange. Dan says he's been told that before. The 5th month. Cedar Wharf no longer looks like a camp in the woods. Dan stands on the roof of the longhouse and looks down. 23 buildings. The longhouse. 10 living huts. The infirmary with a double floor and a separate drain pipe that he spent 2 weeks building for Hannah. A smokehouse. A drying shed. Tom's workshop, which has grown from a shed into a full-fledged log cabin with a workbench and shelves. A blacksmith shop. Primitive. A clay forge with goat skin bellows. But it works. The first copper knife came out of it last week. Crooked, soft, but copper. Real metal. And Sarah's mill. It stands by the stream like a small marvel of engineering in the midst of medieval chaos. A water wheel 3 meters in diameter. It turns slowly and smoothly. The drive shaft is made of oak. The millstones are 2 flat stones that Dan found and shaped himself, spending 4 days on the task. The mill grinds the roots and grains of wild barley into flour. Coarse, with grit, but flour nonetheless. From this flour, Hannah bakes flatbreads. Real flatbreads on a stone slab, with salt, with wild garlic. The scent wafts throughout the harbor every morning. People wake up to that smell. Some cry. Grown men stand there with a flatbread in their hands and cry because it's the first decent meal they've had in 5 months. Because the smell of bread is the smell of home, and home is gone. On the mill's blueprint, Dan wrote in charcoal in the upper right corner, a project by Sarah Magnuson, Cedar Pier. It's the first thing everyone sees when they walk into the mill. Sarah saw the inscription on the 3rd day after the mill opened. She stood there for a minute. Then she went outside. Then she came back. Then she went outside again. Kevin later told Dan that Sarah had gone down to the stream and sat there alone for half an hour. Dan nodded and said nothing. Sarah begins building a sawmill in the 2nd week of the 5th month. A mechanical drive powered by a water wheel. A frame made of oak beams. A saw blade. That's the problem with the blade. There's no steel. Copper is too soft. Dan thinks about it for 3 days. Then he goes to the mine and works 12 hours straight. A rich vein pays off twice. The second time, a piece of dark metal falls out of the ordinary copper ore. System window. A rare resource obtained. Meteorite iron. Excellent quality. Suitable for creating top-tier tools. He takes it to Sarah, places it on the workbench, says it'll be enough for 1 saw blade if forged thinly. Sarah takes the piece of meteorite iron. She weighs it in her palm. Her eyes light up so brightly that Kevin will later say it was the first time he'd ever seen an engineer fall in love with a piece of rock. She forges the blade for a week. Dan stands nearby. He pumps the bellows. He hands her tools. He holds the workpiece with tongs while she strikes it with the hammer. They work together in silence. For hours. Sometimes Sarah gives orders. Hold it tighter. Turn it. One more time. Dan obeys without a word. Here she's the master. He's the apprentice. And that's how it should be. By the 6th month, Dan reaches level 50. It happens quietly. He's mining ore in the mine, alone, as usual. A swing of the pickaxe. A system window. Level 50. No new skills. No messages about hidden abilities, just a number. He wipes the sweat from his brow and continues working. But 3 days later, he notices something strange. Tomatoes. Hannah planted them in the garden by the infirmary from seeds Dan had found. Ordinary wild tomatoes. Small. Sour. But the ones growing in Dan's garden by his hut are twice as big. Red. Juicy. The size of a fist. He stands in front of the garden and stares. Then he checks the soil through the eye of the earth. It's the same. Same composition. Same quality. The only difference is that he dug this garden bed himself, with his own hands. The following week, Hannah tells him that Greg, the injured bricklayer, is healing faster than he should. The wound, which according to her calculations was supposed to take 3 weeks to heal, closed in 10 days. Clean. No inflammation. She doesn't understand why. Dan doesn't understand either. But he notices one more thing. Flatbreads made from flour ground at Sarah's mill last 3 days. Flatbreads made from flour he ground by hand in a stone mortar last a week. He takes one flatbread and breaks it apart. System window. Food item. Flatbread. High quality. Shelf life increased. Property. Slightly accelerates regeneration upon consumption. He looks at this description, then at his hands. Something changed when he reached level 50. Something the system doesn't show or explain. His hands make things better than they should be. Not because of skill, by nature. He doesn't tell anyone about this. Not yet. In the 6th month, Min So Yu appears. She doesn't come as a refugee. She comes as a merchant. Petite, wearing glasses that she somehow managed to keep intact. 2 pigtails, a backpack stuffed with scrolls. 4 guards follow her, mercenaries from the eastern route. Short, wiry, carrying short swords. Min So stops at the gate and requests an audience with the settlement's leader. Chan stands at the gate and silently points to Dan, who at that moment is crouching by the mill, repairing a bearing made of oiled wood. Min So approaches him. She looks down at the man, who is elbow-deep in mud with a wooden sleeve clenched between his teeth. She asks if he is the head of Cedar Harbor. Dan takes the sleeve out of his mouth. He says he isn't the head. He's a carpenter. Min-so adjusts her glasses. She says that carpenter or not, she's driven 400 kilometers along the Eastern Highway, and his settlement is the only one that smells of bread. And that she wants to propose a trade agreement with the 7 settlements she represents for 15% of the turnover. Dan sets the sleeve aside. He stands up. He wipes his hands on his pants. He asks to see the calculations. Min-so unrolls the scroll. Numbers, routes, calculations of transportation costs, potential volume, risks. Everything is written out in small, neat handwriting with notes in different colors. Charcoal for the key figures, red clay for the risks, green for the profit. Dan reads. For a long time. Min-so waits. She's used to waiting. Men usually don't read her calculations. They look at her and say that a little girl can't possibly know how the economy works. Or they take the scroll and hand it to their advisor. Or they just name their price without looking. Dan reads every line. Then he raises his head. He says he'll agree to 20%. Min-so opens her mouth, closes it, says she quoted 15. Dan says he knows, and that she's underestimated herself, that the route via the Eastern Highway in winter will require additional security costs, and that if her calculation doesn't account for the winter surcharge, then 15% will eat into her profits by the 3rd month. Min-so blinks. Then she takes off her glasses, wipes them, puts them back on, looks at Dan with a new gaze. She says that no man has ever raised her price before. Dan says he isn't raising her price. He pays a fair price. Min-so stands before him for 3 seconds. Then she extends her hand. He shakes it. Her palm is small and cold. Her grip is firm. The 7th month. Min-so is working. Her caravans leave the harbor every 10 days. Smoked meat, salt, flour, honey, copper, planks from Sarah's sawmill. All of this goes east and south. Leather comes back. Iron, fabric, seeds, rope. Things that the harbor doesn't produce but that are needed every day. Min-so sits in her hut late into the night every night. Beeswax candles, scrolls, maps. She calculates. She calculates. She calculates. She works out the profit margin for each route. She charts new trails. She compiles dossiers on every merchant and every leader of every settlement within a 500-kilometer radius. Dan brings her tea at 4 in the morning. A brew of dried berries and mint. Hot. In a mug he made himself. The mug is slightly wider than standard ones, with a thickened handle. Because Min-so has small hands, and a regular mug slips out of her grasp when her fingers freeze from working through the night. She notices this on the 3rd try. She takes the mug, looks at the handle, then at Dan. He's already leaving. She opens her mouth to say something, closes it. She drinks her tea. She doesn't give the mug back. That same week, Dan builds a shelf in Min-so's cabin. Not because she asked him to, because her scrolls are lying on the floor and getting damp. The shelf is slanted, 3 degrees. Just enough so the scrolls don't roll off but don't press against each other either. She returns in the evening and sees the shelf. She stands in front of it. She places a scroll on it. It stays there. It doesn't roll off. She places a second one, a third, a fourth. Not a single one moves. She stands in front of that shelf for a very long time. Then she sits down at the table and works until morning. But in the corner of the scroll she unrolls that night, she draws a small cedar tree. Just like that. For no reason. In the 8th month, Dan receives his first letter from the syndicate. Not a threat, an invitation. Marcus Holloway, king of the syndicate, invites the head of Cedar Harbor to negotiations. Neutral territory, a crossroads of highways 100 kilometers to the east. No weapons, no security, just the leaders. Min-so reads the letter and shakes his head. He says it's a trap. He says Marcus doesn't negotiate. He buys people off. And those he can't buy, he breaks. Dan reads the letter twice. Then he folds it up. He says he'll go. Kevin jumps up. He says Dan has lost his mind, that they'll kill him, that the syndicate has 300 fighters and 12 mages, and that Dan is just one guy with an axe. Dan says that's exactly why. One guy with an axe isn't a threat to anyone, and that he needs to see Marcus in person to understand who he's dealing with. He goes alone. It's a 3-day trek through the forest. He spends the nights by campfires, He eats from his supplies. He thinks. A crossroads of trails. A flat clearing where two rivers meet. On the west bank stands Marcus Holloway, 41 years old, tall, fit, tanned. Wearing clean clothes, which, in the 8th month on the continent, is a statement in itself. Two men stand beside him. He said he'd come without security, but these two don't look like security guards. They look like advisors. Smooth faces, calm eyes. The marks above their heads are hidden. Dan approaches. Marcus smiles. Broadly, warmly. He extends his hand, says it's finally nice to meet in person, that rumors of Cedar Harbor have reached the East Coast, that he's impressed, seriously, without irony. He says it so convincingly that Dan believes him for a second. Marcus invites him to sit down. A blanket is spread out on the ground. There's food on it. Real food. Cheese. Dried meat. Fruit. Wine. Where does wine come from on the survival continent? Dan doesn't ask. He sits down. He doesn't eat. Marcus begins to speak. He speaks well. Intelligently. Logically. His proposal is simple. The syndicate provides the harbor with military protection. Complete protection. Against any clans. From the waves. From marauders. In return, the harbor supplies resources. Food. Wood. Metal. 30% of everything it produces. 30% for security. Marcus says it's a fair price. That's how all civilizations have worked. Warriors protect. Producers feed. The natural order. Dan listens. Marcus moves on to the numbers, to strategy, to long-term plans. He talks about the second wave, which will be more powerful than the first. About the third, which, according to his data, will bring creatures of level A and above. About how the harbor, with its wooden walls, won't hold out without a combat core. Dan listens. Marcus changes tactics. He starts speaking personally. He says he sees a builder in Dan, a real one, a rare one, that the world depends on people like that, and that people like that need a roof over their heads, protection, patronage. That Dan is too valuable to risk. Dan listens. Marcus leans forward. He says that the syndicate can make Cedar Harbor the commercial capital of the entire continent, that Marcus has the resources, warriors, connections, everything he needs. He asks for only one thing, to recognize the syndicate as the supreme authority. Formally, on paper, one signature, and the harbor will have an army. Dan listened to all of this without interrupting. 20 minutes. Marcus finishes and waits. Dan is silent for 5 seconds. Then he says 14 words. My walls have stood without your army. My grain grows without your permission. Goodbye. He stands up, turns around, walks away. Marcus sits on the blanket and watches his back. His advisors exchange glances. Marcus slowly picks up a piece of cheese, chews. Then he starts to laugh, quietly, nervously. It's not the laugh of a man who finds something funny. It's the laugh of a man who, for the first time in 8 months on this continent, has met someone he can neither buy nor intimidate, and who realizes that this is a problem. Dan has been walking back for 3 days, he thinks. Marcus isn't a fool. Marcus is dangerous precisely because he's smart. His proposal was logical. In a world where the strongest survive, protection in exchange for resources is a natural model. It has worked for thousands of years in real history. The problem lies elsewhere. Dan saw Marcus's eyes. Warm, charming, and completely empty. Behind the smile there is no person. There is a system. Marcus believes in his model not because it's effective, but because it puts him on top. Dan returns to the harbor on the 11th day. Kevin meets him at the gate. He asks how it went. Dan says war is coming soon, the 9th month. War comes not as a blow but as a noose. First, the Minso caravans start disappearing. The first one, a shipment of smoked meat and salt headed south. 4 guards. 2 return a week later, beaten, without cargo. They say they were attacked by men in gray masks. No identifying marks. But the swords were syndicate-made, forged, with a gear-shaped brand. Minso counts the losses, quietly, calmly. He records them on a scroll. Then he counts them again. Then he goes to Dan and says that Marcus has started. Not head-on, through the economy. If the caravans stop running, the harbor will lose its trade. Without trade, there will be no iron, no cloth, no seeds. In 3 months, the harbor will be set back 6 months. Dan listens, nods, says he needs 2 days. He thinks for 2 days. He works as usual, chops wood, builds, mines ore, but he thinks. On the 3rd day, he calls a council meeting. Kevin, Hannah, Chong, Sarah, Minso, Jia, Tom. Everyone is in the longhouse at the table Dan built a month ago. The table is round. No leader. Everyone is equal. He explains the situation. The syndicate will strangle them economically, block the trade routes, rob caravans, poach trading partners. Then, when the harbor weakens, the army will come. 3 clans, 300 fighters, 12 mages. Against their 70 people, 20 of whom are fighters. Kevin says they need to strike first. Strike while they're not expecting it. Chong shakes his head, silently. But everyone understands. They're not an army. They don't have the strength to launch an offensive. Jia says she can wipe out one of the syndicate's caravans. Just one. As a warning. Dan says no. Hannah says war means the wounded and the dead, and that she doesn't have the resources to sustain massive casualties. Sarah says that the harbor's walls won't withstand an assault by 300 fighters. Wood against steel. The math is simple. Minso is silent. Everyone is talking. She's silent. Then she raises her hand. Everyone falls quiet. She says one word. Time. Marcus needs time to unite the 3 clans into a single force. They're allies, not a single entity. Each clan has its own interests, its own resources, its own ambitions. If Marcus spends a month on the blockade, then in a month, 2 of the 3 clans will start to have doubts because the blockade is draining resources on both sides. She needs 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, she can establish a new trade route, the northern one, through the mountain pass. Longer, more expensive, but outside the syndicate's control. Dan looks at her. He asks what she needs. She says 10 guards and a shipment of goods for a test run. Dan nods. Then he turns to Sarah. He asks if she can reinforce the walls in a month. Sarah thinks for a moment. She says that if Dan gives her enough stone and ironwood, she can line the wooden walls with stone masonry from the inside. Not completely. Just the key points. The gates, the corners, and the tower. Dan pulls a piece of ironwood from his inventory. Then a second. A third. He'd been hoarding it for months. Every piece from the rich vein. Sarah looks at this wealth. Her eyes light up. She grabs the first piece with both hands and is already visualizing the structure in her mind. Dan turns to Chong. He says he needs reconnaissance. Where the syndicate's troops are stationed. How many there are. Where the supply convoys are. Where the weak spots are. Chong nods once. He stands up. He leaves. 5 minutes later, he's already gone from the harbor. In 3 days, he'll return with information that will change everything. Kevin asks what he should do. Dan says Kevin needs to train 4 more people to set fire traps. Not along the perimeter, on the approaches, trails, ford crossings, narrow spots in the forest. Everything leading to the harbor must be mined within a kilometer radius. Kevin grins. For the first time in a week, he says Dan thinks like a guerrilla. Dan says he thinks like a forester. Because a forester knows his forest better than any invader. The siege begins in the 3rd week of the 9th month. Not an assault. A siege. 200 syndicate men set up camp 2 kilometers from the pier. They block the southern and eastern trails. They leave the western one untouched. It's a trap. They want the pier to flee westward, into the forest, where they can be picked off in small groups. Dan doesn't run. He stands on the tower and through his binoculars. He doesn't have binoculars. But the eye of the earth at level 50 shows him details at a distance of 200 meters. He sees the syndicate's camp. Tents, campfires, a supply train, 3 carts of food, 1 with water. He counts. 200 men, 3 carts of food. If they eat normally, they have enough for 10 days. If they ration, 15. After that, they'll have to either attack or leave. Dan tells Kevin, 15 days. Kevin asks, 15 days of what? Dan says, patience. A week passes. The syndicate is holding its ground. The pier is holding its ground. Nothing happens. This is the hardest part. The people inside the walls are getting nervous. Children are crying. Women are whispering in the corners. Someone says they should surrender, that Marcus promised safety, that 30% isn't really that much. Dan hears these conversations. He doesn't react. He keeps working, chopping, building, fortifying. Every day he goes outside the walls, alone, with an axe. He chops wood 100 meters from the syndicate's camp. They see him. He sees that they see him, and he keeps chopping. This isn't bravery. It's a message. We're not afraid. We're working. On the 10th day of the siege, Chong returns. He'd been behind syndicate lines for 9 days. He draws a map on the ground with a stick. The supply train, 3 wagons. They're parked by a stream half a kilometer behind the main camp. 4 guards, 2 at night. Dan looks at the map, then at Chong, then at Jia. He says 2 words to her. The supply train, at night. Jia raises an eyebrow, then she nods. No smile, but something flashes in her eyes, something predatory. They set out 2 hours before dawn. Dan, Jia, Chong. 3 people. Through the forest. Silently. Chong leads the way. He knows every route, every branch. Jia moves behind him like a shadow. Dan brings up the rear. He's no fighter. He's not here to fight. The convoy. 3 wagons. 2 guards are asleep. 1 is sitting by the fire, nodding off. Chong takes him out with a single arrow. Not to the heart, to the shoulder. The man falls and remains silent from the shock. Jia bursts in like the wind. The 2 sleeping guards don't have time to get up. Blows to the back of the head with the butt of his weapon. Their bodies go limp. Alive. Unconscious. Dan approaches the wagons. He opens them. Sacks of grain. Barrels of water. Dried meat. He loads everything into their gear. 5 cubic meters are packed to the brim. Then he takes a flask of oil from the 3rd wagon. He pours it over all 3. He nods to Jia. She strikes a spark with her sword against a stone. The wagons burst into flames. They leave before a cry goes up from the syndicate camp. In the morning, Marcus stands before the charred remains of his supply train and, for the first time during the siege, does not smile. 200 men. 0 supplies. The nearest supply source is a 3-day journey away. The math is simple. On the 12th day of the siege, the first of the 3 syndicate clans withdraws and leaves. On the 13th, the second. On the 14th, Marcus stands with 70 fighters and looks at the walls of the harbor. Walls from behind which smoke rises from a kitchen chimney, and the smell of bread fills the air. He turns around. He leaves. Dan stands on the tower and watches as the syndicate column disappears into the forest. Kevin is beside him. He's shouting so loud that the whole forest can hear him. They fought their way out. They're legends. They're the greatest warriors on the continent. Dan looks at the breach in the southern wall created by the battering ram on the 9th day. He says they need a new beam. This one's going to be firewood. The 10th month. After the siege's failure, Marcus falls silent. But Minso says that Marcus's silence is more than his scream. She's right. Dan can feel it. Just as he can feel a crack in a log before it splits. Something is building. Something is brewing. He doesn't know exactly what, but he knows time is running out. The harbor is growing. 120 people. 5 satellite settlements have sprung up along Minso's trade routes. Small ones. 10 to 20 people each, but linked to the harbor by roads and treaties. Dan builds for each one, personally. He's gone for 3 days. He erects walls, digs a well, shows where the clay is, where the stone is, where barley can be planted. He returns. His level is 68. His range covers 300 meters. His inventory is 8 cubic meters. A rich vein yields a resource every 8th time. The oddities are intensifying. The apple tree he planted near Sarah's mill blossomed in 2 weeks instead of 2 years. Hannah says her patients recover a third faster if Dan stops by the infirmary at least once during their treatment. Tom carved a stool from a scrap of oak that Dan gave him. The stool has been standing for 3 months now. Not a single creak. Not wobble. It's as if the wood has forgotten that it can dry out. Dan notices all of this. He keeps it in his head. He doesn't tell anyone. Not yet. Toward the end of the 10th month, a woman approaches the gates of the harbor. Alone. Unarmed. No class marker above her head. No. There is a marker, but it flickers, as if the system can't decide what to display. Scout. Rank A. Name, Hannah Davis. 25 years old. Calm. Quiet. With eyes that look just a little further than they need to, as if she sees something beyond objects, beyond walls, beyond people. Gian at the gate tenses up. He can't explain why. He just feels that this woman isn't like everyone else. Dan goes out to meet her. She says she's traveling alone, that she's heard of the harbor, that she wants to stay for a while. Dan looks at her. The eye of the earth doesn't track people, only resources. But Dan has learned to read people without the system's cues. 3 years in the woods with tourists who lied about their experience. 2 years with loggers who lied about their sobriety. 11 months with clients who lied about their budgets. He can tell she's not lying, but she isn't telling the whole truth either. She's telling part of the truth, a small part. He points out a vacant cabin to her. He tells her she can stay, that they're working here. She nods, asks how she can help. He says that Chong needs a partner for a long-range reconnaissance mission. She agrees, easily, too easily. Chong and Hannah head into the woods for 4 days. They return with a map of the area within a 50-kilometer radius. Detailed, accurate, with notes on resources and dangers. John, who usually doesn't say more than 10 words a day, approaches Dan and says 12. She's the best scout I've ever seen. Too good. Dan nods. He thinks the same thing. Hannah fits into life at the harbor quietly and unobtrusively. She helps Hannah in the infirmary. She mends nets with the fishermen. She tells the children stories by the campfire. Strange stories. About worlds where trees grow with their roots pointing upward. About creatures that build cities out of music. About empty planets waiting for someone to plant the first seed on them. The children listen with their mouths agape. Dan listens from around the corner of the hut, and goosebumps run down his spine. Because she tells these stories not as fairy tales. She tells them as memories. The 11th month. The second wave. It arrives exactly on the 100th day, just as the system promised. Dan is ready. The walls have been reinforced with Sarah's stonework. The tower has been rebuilt. The moat has been widened and deepened. Kevin has trained 6 new fire trap operators. Chong has trained 8 archers. Gia has formed a 5-person rapid response squad. Hannah has set up a 30-bed infirmary. The second wave lasts 5 days. The creatures are stronger, larger. Among them are beings that Minso, based on what the merchants say, calls reapers. They're 2 meters tall. They have bone blades instead of front paws. They're fast. One reaper breaks through the southern wall on the second day. Gia confronts it in the breach. The fight lasts 20 seconds. The reaper falls. Gia has a deep cut on her left shoulder. She doesn't notice it until Hannah grabs her by the arm and drags her to the infirmary. Gia hisses and breaks free. She says she's fine. Hannah says the wound goes down to the bone, and that if Gia doesn't sit down, she'll tie her to the cot. Gia sits down. She looks at Hannah with fury in her eyes. Then the fury fades. Something else remains. Respect. Perhaps. Hannah stitches up the wound. Thread made from processed tendons. A needle made from fishbone. Rough, but it works. Honey on the wound. A bandage. 2 hours later, Gia is back on the wall. With 1 working hand and 1 sword. She kills 3 more creatures before dawn. The dock survives a second wave. 4 wounded. Not a single death. Not one. Again. When the system window announces the end of the wave, Dan stands in the middle of the courtyard and counts the people. 120. Everyone's here. He closes his eyes, opens them, goes to make soup. In the evening after the wave, Hannah Davis sits on the roof of the longhouse, alone. She looks at the stars. 2 moons, a white one and a blue one. Dan climbs up to her. He sits down next to her. Silence. They sit for 10 minutes without speaking. Then Hannah says she spent almost a year with those people. That she ate with them, froze with them, was afraid with them. That she didn't know fear could be like that. Alive, burning, real. Dan listens. He doesn't ask any questions. She says that soon she'll have to tell him the truth, and that the truth will change everything. Dan is silent. Then he says that the truth doesn't change anything. It's the decisions people make after hearing it that change things. Hannah turns toward him. She looks at him for a long time. Her eyes are moist. For the first time since she's been at the harbor. She says he's the strangest person she's ever observed. Dan smiles slightly. He says he's been told that before. She laughs softly. The sound is unexpected. Fragile. Like the first crack in the ice. The end of the first year. Hannah tells the truth. They're sitting on the roof of the sawmill. Night. The harbor sleeps. Only the sentries on the walls and the distant glow from the forge where Sarah is working late, as always. Hannah speaks slowly. She chooses her words carefully, like someone who has spent her whole life writing reports and now has to say something from the heart. She says she isn't human, not in the full sense of the word. Her consciousness has been placed in a player's body, but she was not created the way humans are. She is an observer, an emissary of the force that built this game. Dan listens. He doesn't interrupt. She says that the game is not entertainment, not an experiment, not a punishment. It is a selection process. An ancient civilization created a system to seek out guardians, people capable of building, not destroying. In the universe, there are worlds that have died, planets in the aftermath of catastrophes, empty, cold, waiting. They need those who know how to start from scratch. The Gatherer class isn't a dumping ground. It's a filter. Everyone the system deems a potential candidate is assigned to it. Most drop out within the first week. The system offers a class change through a quest, a quick, easy path to a combat class. Almost everyone accepts. Dan didn't refuse. In fact, he didn't even notice the offer. The system window with the class change proposal flashed by on the second day, between two swings of the axe. He swiped it away without reading it, like an ad banner. Hannah falls silent. Dan sits motionless. He looks at his hands. Then he asks one thing. All 200,000 people are here. They're all dead. Hannah nods. Every player on the continent was captured by the system at the moment of their death. Car accidents, illnesses, accidents, murders, suicides. They were all already dead. The system took them a second before the end, brought them here, gave them a second chance. But back home, they'd already been buried. They're gone. They were mourned. They were forgotten. Going home doesn't mean going back to your old life. It means getting a new life, in a world of your choosing, with memories, with skills, but without a past. Dan sits on the roof of the sawmill and stares at the stars. For a long time. A very long time. Hannah waits beside him. She doesn't say a word. He thinks about his mom, about the little house in Portland with the yellow door, about the smell of her kimchi that always greeted him when he came home from work. She got a call from the police, probably in the middle of the night. She was probably sitting alone in the kitchen, listening to a stranger's voice tell her that her son had drowned in the Willamette River. She's standing in front of his photo right now. In the photo, he's 20 years old, wearing a forest ranger's uniform, smiling. She tells him good morning every day. He knows that, because that's what his grandmother used to do with a photo of his grandfather. Dan clenches his hands into fists, unclenches them, clenches them again. His fingernails dig into his palms. Hannah quietly places her hand next to his, without touching him, just next to him. He asks why she told him this. She's silent. Then she says it's because he needs to know, and because soon he'll be offered a choice, to become a keeper, to accept the contract, to go to one of the dead worlds and revive it, alone, or to refuse and stay here, with the people, with the harbor, with the life he's built. Dan asks what will happen to the people if he leaves. Hannah says the haven will survive. He didn't build it on himself. He built it on the people. They'll manage. Dan shakes his head. He says she doesn't understand. The question isn't whether they'll manage. The question is why he built all this if not for them. Hannah looks at him. Something breaks in her eyes. Quietly, like a twig under the snow. She says that for the first time in her very long life, she doesn't know what to write in her report. because a report requires objectivity, and she lost that the moment he brought her a bowl of soup during the wave, the same as everyone else's, with her portion, without any special treatment, just a bowl, because he remembered that she doesn't eat well-done meat. Dan is silent. Hannah is silent. 2 moons shine over the harbor. Somewhere below, Kevin is snoring so loudly that he can be heard on the roof. Dan almost smiles. He says he needs time. She nods. In the morning, Dan comes down from the roof. He grabs an axe. He heads into the woods. He chops wood all day, until his hands are covered in bloody blisters, until his hands are shaking, until dark. He returns. He eats. He goes to sleep. The next day, he gets up and builds, just like always, as if nothing had changed. But something has changed. He looks at the people of the pier differently. At Hannah, who checks on every child every morning. At Kevin, who teaches the newcomers how to build a fire while joking so they forget to be afraid. At Tom, who has grown 10 centimeters and whose hands are now covered in calluses like those of a grown man. At Sarah, who sleeps in the workshop hugging the blueprint for a new windmill. At Minso, who drinks tea from that very same mug and draws little cedars in the margins of her trade scrolls. At G.A. G.A. has changed, slowly, imperceptibly to those who aren't looking closely. But Dan is looking closely. She dances by the campfire in the evenings. Not every evening. Sometimes, when she's in the mood, without swords. She just dances, and people gather around and watch. And then someone stands up and tries to copy her movements. And she doesn't get angry. She corrects them, quietly, patiently. Hand here, foot there, back straight. Like a teacher. She doesn't notice that she's smiling. Dan notices. Midway through the second year, Marcus returns. Not with 200 fighters, with 500. In the 10 months since the siege failed, he's united not 3 clans, but 7. The eastern route is completely under his control. The southern route partially. The 3 settlements that traded with the harbor have come under his banner. Not voluntarily. The choice was simple. The syndicate or ashes. Minso brings the news 6 days before the start. Her scouts on the northern route intercepted a messenger. Marcus is marching on the harbor. Not for a siege, to destroy it. A full-scale military operation. 500 fighters, 20 mages, siege engines, battering rams, catapults. He's learned from his mistake with the supply train. This time a month's worth of supplies. 3 supply lines. Redundancy. Minso unfolds the map on the table. Her hands are shaking. For the first time. She says the math isn't in their favor. 150 people at the dock. 40 fighters. Against 500. Not even the walls will help. Not even the traps. Not even Gia. The council gathers. Everyone around the round table. Kevin is silent. Chong is silent. Hannah is silent. Sarah is silent. Tom sits pale, twirling a wooden spoon in his hands. That very one. The first one. The one he carved on his first day. He carries it with him as a talisman. Gia says she'll go out to meet them. Alone. At night. She'll take out the commanders. Without the commanders, the army will fall apart. Dan says no. Not because it's a bad plan. Because she won't come back. 500 people. 20 mages. Not even an A rank would make it through that alive. Gia looks at him. Her eyes are burning. She says it's her choice. Dan says no, not hers, because she's needed here, alive. Gia opens her mouth, closes it, turns away. Her hands grip the hilt of her sword so tightly that her knuckles turn white. Hannah Davis stands up. Everyone looks at her. She doesn't often speak up at council meetings. She says there's another way, but it will require Dan to do something he's never done before. She says that the Keeper's ability doesn't just work on resources. At level 50 and above, a Keeper can influence the earth itself, roots, stones, water, soil. If Dan focuses his ability not on extraction but on defense, he'll be able to raise walls that no battering ram can break through. Not wooden ones, stone ones, formed from the earth itself. Dan looks at Hannah. He asks why she didn't say anything sooner. She says it's because he wasn't ready before, and because it's not a skill. It's a decision. If he does this, the system will register him as an active guardian, not a candidate. The contract will be activated. He'll be bound to the land, to this land, to the harbor, forever. He won't be able to leave. He won't be able to become an ordinary person. He'll become part of this world. Silence. Kevin says quietly that it's an unfair choice. Hannah says that choices are never fair. Dan stands up. He walks out of the longhouse. He heads toward the eastern wall. That very one. The first one. The one he built on the 22nd day out of crooked stakes and damp clay. It has already been rebuilt 3 times. Sheathed in stone. Reinforced with ironwood. But he remembers every version, every nail, every stake. He places his palm on the wall. Closes his eyes. Stands there for 5 minutes. 10. 20. Then he opens his eyes and walks back. He enters the longhouse. Everyone is waiting. He sits down. He says 2 words. I'm ready. 4 days. Dan has 4 days before Marcus's army arrives. He works. Not like before. Differently. He steps outside the gate. He gets down on his knees. He places both palms on the ground. He closes his eyes. The eye of the earth flashes at full intensity. 300 meters. Then 400. 500. He sees everything. Every stone beneath the ground. Every root. Every vein of rock. Every underground stream. He sees the skeleton of the earth, and he asks. He doesn't command, he asks. Rise. The earth obeys, slowly, with a creak, with a rumble that the people in Priston feel through the soles of their feet. Stones rise from beneath the turf. Granite, the salt, huge flat slabs that have lain 10 meters deep for millions of years. They rise and stand upright. One after another. Behind the third, along the line of the walls. Tree roots twist out of the ground and entwine the stones, binding them together like rebar. The stream changes course. It fills the moat to the brim. The land around the pier turns into a fortress. Not a built one. Grown. Dan works for 4 days. He doesn't eat. He doesn't sleep. Hannah tries to stop him twice. He doesn't hear her. Kevin stands nearby, making sure he doesn't fall. J.A. stands on the wall and watches as the stones rise from beneath the earth. Her face is pale. She has seen many strange things on this continent, but this is something else. On the 4th day, Dan finishes. The walls of Cedar Harbor are now 3 meters thick. Granite and basalt, entwined with living roots. The moat is deep and full. The towers are made of stone, 4 of them at the corners. The ground around the walls is bare for 100 meters. Not a tree. Not a bush. A clear firing range. Dan stands at the gate. A gate made of ironwood, 1/2 meter thick. He's staggering. His legs won't hold him up. 4 days without food or sleep. His level is 72. The system window he hasn't seen in 4 days finally pops up. Status changed. Class. Caretaker. Rank. Undefined. Location. Cedar Harbor. Continent. Aurelian. Contract activated. He closes the window. He falls. Kevin catches him. Hannah screams. Hannah runs. They carry him to the infirmary. He sleeps for 30 hours. When he wakes up, there's dust on the horizon. Marcus's army. Marcus stops a kilometer from the walls. Dan sees this from the tower. He's still weak. His legs feel like cotton. His hands are shaking. But he stands his ground. Kevin is beside him. Chong is on the neighboring tower with a bow. G.A. is at the gate, as always. The Syndicate's army stretches out in a crescent around the harbor. 500 men, spears, swords, shields. 20 mages in the rear ranks. Blue cloaks. 3 catapults. 2 wheeled battering rams. Marcus stands at the front, alone, without a helmet, without a shield, in plain garments. He's looking at the walls of the harbor, the stone walls that weren't there 4 days ago, at the granite towers, at the moat filled with water. His expression doesn't change. But Dan sees how he's standing, a little stiffer than usual, a little straighter. That's how people stand when they've seen something they didn't expect and are trying not to show it. Marcus raises his hand. A man steps forward from the ranks, the herald, He shouts. Marcus Holloway, king of the syndicate, offers the leader of Cedar Harbor one last chance to open the gates, to acknowledge the syndicate's supremacy, hand over 30% of production, save their lives, or the walls will fall, and nothing will remain of the harbor. Dan stands on the tower and listens. Then he turns to Kevin. He says they should respond. Kevin smirks. He tells Dan to speak. Dan shakes his head. He says Kevin's voice is louder. Kevin takes a deep breath. He steps out to the edge of the tower. He shouts so loudly that he can be heard in the back rows of the army. He shouts that Cedar Harbor invites the syndicate to breakfast, that they have fresh bread, smoked meat, and honey, but only after they remove their spears from the gate. Silence. Then someone in the syndicate's ranks laughs. Marcus doesn't laugh. He lowers his hand. The first catapult fires. A stone the size of a barrel arcs through the air and slams into the wall. A crash. A rumble. Dust. Dan grabs the edge of the tower. The wall shudders, but it stands. The stone leaves a dent as deep as a palm. In granite. Granite that has lain underground for 1,000,000 years won't break from a single stone. A second catapult. A third. Blows one after another. The walls rumble, but they stand. Marcus waits an hour. Then he sends in the battering rams. 2 wheeled battering rams roll toward the gates. 30 men push each one. Kevin fires from the tower. 1 battering ram bursts into flames. The men scatter. The second reaches the moat and stops. The moat is deep. A bridge is needed. There is no bridge. Marcus calls back the battering rams. He sends in the mages. 20 mages step forward. Ice mages, fire mages, earth mages, lightning mages. They strike the walls simultaneously. Ice, flame, lightning, stones. The walls of the harbor hold. The roots entwined around the granite seal the cracks. Living roots. They're growing right now, slowly, but they're growing. Dan can feel it. The walls are alive. They're his walls, his land, his roots. He places his palm on the stone of the tower and feels every blow, every crack, every root creeping into that crack and filling it. The assault lasts all day. By evening, both of Marcus's catapults are broken. 1 battering ram has burned down. 15 men are wounded by Kevin's fire and Chong's arrows. The walls of the harbor stand firm. Not a single breach. Night. Marcus isn't storming the walls. He's waiting, thinking. Dan isn't sleeping either. He's sitting on the tower, thinking. Down below, Hannah is making her rounds among the defenders, checking on them, feeding them, giving them water. No one is injured. Not a single person from the harbor has been hurt all day. The walls have done their job. At dawn on the second day, Marcus steps out in front of his army, alone. He approaches the wall until he's within earshot. He looks up. Dan is standing on the wall. He looks down. Marcus says the walls are impressive. He says he doesn't know how Dan did it, but that the walls don't solve the main problem. Marcus could stand here for a month. He has supplies. So does the harbor. But the harbor's fields are outside the walls. The harvest is outside. The forest is outside. The mine is outside. Marcus could just burn it all down. Cut down the forest. Fill in the mine. Burn the fields. And then in 3 months, the harbor will die on its own, slowly, from starvation. Dan listens. Marcus is right. The walls protect the people, but not the land around them. Marcus says there's another option. A duel. One-on-one. Leader against leader. Marcus versus Dan. If Dan wins, the syndicate leaves. If Marcus wins, the harbor accepts his terms. Marcus is an S-rank war leader, the best fighter on the continent. He knows Dan isn't a fighter. He knows it's not fair. That's exactly why he makes the offer. Dan is silent. He'll lose the duel. It's obvious. He's a collector, a caretaker, not a warrior. His body is strong from 2 years of working with an axe, but against an S-rank fighter, that's nothing. Marcus waits. A voice comes from behind Dan. Others Gia. She speaks softly but loud enough for the entire wall to hear. She says she'll accept the duel on behalf of the harbor. Dan turns around. Gia is standing behind him, swords at her back. Her face is calm. Her eyes are black and steady. No anger, no fear, just resolve. Dan says no. She says he can't fight. That he's a guardian, not a warrior. That his place is here. behind the walls, with the people. And her place is there, in front of the walls, with swords. That's why she's here. Dan looks at her. She looks at him. Then she speaks softly so only he can hear. She says he gave her a home, a bolt from the inside, a bowl of soup, a place by the fire, a dance. And that in 7 months, this is the first place where she's woken up in the morning and not checked for a knife under her pillow. She falls silent. Then she says that if he doesn't let her go into this battle, she'll leave on her own, because some things are worth standing up for. Dan closes his eyes, opens them, nods. The gates open. Jia steps out. 2 slender figures on an empty field before the walls. Marcus and Jia. Marcus looks at her. He says he was expecting Dan. Jia says Dan is busy. Marcus draws his sword. Long, heavy, one-handed. His commander skill amplifies every strike. Speed, strength, accuracy, all at S level. Jia draws 2 swords, light, slender, graceful. The fight begins. Marcus strikes first. A downward blow. Powerful. The ground beneath Jia's feet cracks from the shockwave. She's not there anymore. She's already to the side. 2 slashes. To her left forearm and her right thigh. Not deep, but fast. Marcus turns. He swings horizontally. Jia crouches. The blade passes over her head. She strikes from below. A left-handed sword strike to the ribs. Marcus jumps back, blood on his side. He looks at the wound, then at her. For the first time in the fight, his expression is serious. They clash again. Marcus is faster than he seemed, stronger than he seemed. His commander skill grants him a boost after every strike he takes. The more wounds he sustains, the stronger he becomes. It's a trap. Every cut Jia lands makes him more powerful. She realizes this by the 3rd exchange. She changes tactics. She stops striking. She only dodges. She dances. Marcus strikes. Once, twice, 5 times, 10 times. Misses. Every strike misses. She moves like water, like music. 6 years of choreography, 10 hours a day. Her body remembers every beat. Marcus is getting tired. His skill enhances his body but not his stamina. Every strike drains his strength. He slows down. On the 12th strike, he misses, and his sword plunges into the ground. For half a second. Jia strikes with both blades. Across. Marcus's sword flies out of his hand. It spins through the air. It plunges into the ground 10 meters away. Marcus is on his knees. 2 blades are at his throat. Jia stands over him, breathing heavily, blood on his cheek. His blood. Silence hangs over the walls. Then Kevin starts screaming. Marcus is on his knees with 2 blades at his throat. The field is silent. 500 syndicate men stand and watch as their king stands in the dust before a girl with 2 swords. Jia holds the blades steady. She doesn't tremble. She takes her time. She waits. Dan climbs down from the wall. Slowly. His legs are still weak after 4 days without sleep. He walks through the gate. He steps out onto the field. He walks toward them. The people on the walls are watching. The people in the syndicate's army are watching. Everyone is watching the quiet man with the hands of a laborer as he walks across the empty field toward the defeated king. Dan stops in front of Marcus. He looks down at him. Marcus looks up. There is no fear in his eyes. There is anger, and something else. Something like curiosity. Dan tells Jia to put away her swords. Jia doesn't move. She looks at Dan. He nods. She puts away the blades. Slowly, reluctantly, but she puts them away. Marcus stands up. He brushes the dust off his knees. He looks at Dan. He waits. He's waiting for the terms. Waiting for humiliation. Waiting for what victors do to the vanquished. That's how the world he understands works. Dan says that Marcus lost the duel. That the condition was simple. The syndicate is leaving. Marcus nods. Dan says he's not finished yet. Marcus freezes. Dan says that the syndicate is leaving, but the syndicate's people can stay. Not as an army. As people. Marcus has 500 men. Fighters, artisans, bricklayers, cooks, carpenters, blacksmiths. They're all here not because they want to fight, but because they want to survive. And Marcus gave them the only way he knew. Strength in exchange for food, control in exchange for safety. Dan says there's another way. Trade, production, cooperation, not vassalage but partnership. Marcus can disband the syndicate as a military force, relocate people to settlements, start building instead of taking. Every clan gets territory. Every clan trades through a shared network. Minso is already mapping out routes. The harbor provides the technology, mills, sawmills, waterworks, forges, everything Sarah knows how to build. In exchange, the harbor gets a workforce and security. Not 30%, not a tribute. Trade, fair trade, at prices set by Minso. Marcus listens. His expression doesn't change. Then he says it's naive, that the world doesn't work that way, that the strong always take from the weak, that it's nature. Dan says nature is the forest. He knows the forest. The forest doesn't work that way. In the forest, the strongest tree isn't the one that crushed the others, but the one that has grown taller than all the others because its roots have intertwined with those of its neighbors. Because the mycelium underground has bound them into a single network. And when a storm comes, the lone tree breaks, but the forest stands. Marcus is silent. Dan is silent. Pole is silent. Then Marcus says quietly that Dan is no fighter, no strategist, no a politician, and that he's the only person on this continent whom Marcus hasn't been able to figure out. Because it's impossible to outmaneuver a man who does what's right rather than what's profitable. Marcus turns around. He walks toward his army. He stops. Without looking back, he says he'll think it over. And he leaves. The syndicate's army withdraws and heads east. 500 men. The dust settles. The field is empty. J.A. stands next to Dan. He says Dan is an idiot, that they should have finished him off, that Marcus will return. Dan says maybe, or maybe not. 3 weeks later, a letter arrives. Marcus disbands 2 of the 7 clans. He relocates the people to settlements. He begins trading via the Minso northern route. Not all the clans agree. 3 break away and head south. But the core of the syndicate is changing, slowly, with a creak. But it's changing. Minso receives the first caravan from the former syndicate in the 4th week. Iron, real iron, forged, in ingots. She places the ingots in front of Sarah. Sarah looks at the iron. Then she grabs an ingot with both hands and presses it to her chest, like a child. Kevin says that Sarah just hugged a piece of metal. Sarah tells Kevin that he doesn't understand and that this is the best iron she's seen in 2 years. Months go by. The 3rd year, the dock is no longer a settlement. It's a town. 400 people, stone walls, running water, 3 mills, 2 forges, a sawmill with 2 saw blades, a school. Tom teaches there. He's 18. He's grown up. He's become a man. His hands are covered in scars and calluses, and he's the best woodcarver on the continent. He teaches the children how to work with wood, with the same patience Dan once used to teach him. Hannah has opened a hospital, not a field hospital, but a real hospital. 12 beds, an operating room, sterile, with instruments that Sarah forged based on, with an antibiotic made from mold that Dan cultivates on special bread. Hannah doesn't cry at night anymore. She sleeps next to Dan. Not every night. Sometimes. When neither of them is busy. Which happens rarely. But when it does, she takes his hand and doesn't let go until morning. No words. No explanations. Just hand in hand. 2 adults who found each other at the end of the world. Gia dances every evening. By the bonfire in the main square. Dozens of people come to her. She teaches. Strictly, demandingly, but with a patience she didn't know she had a year ago. Sometimes after dancing, she sits on the wall and looks at the stars. Sometimes Kevin sits down next to her. They don't talk. They just sit there. It's new, quiet, unnamed. Minso runs a trade network spanning 23 settlements. Her scrolls take up 3 shelves, those very ones, tilted at a 3-degree angle. She drinks tea from that very mug. In the margins of each scroll is a small cedar tree. Sarah is building a windmill, her second one, and she's drawing a blueprint for an aqueduct. In the upper right corner of every drawing, Sarah Magnuson's project, Cedar Pier. Hannah Davis is staying, She was supposed to leave, to write a report, to return to those who sent her. Instead, she sits on the roof of the sawmill every evening and looks at the two moons. And when Dan asks her what she'll write in the report, she says she'll write the truth. That the keeper has been found, that he refused to leave, that he chose the people, and that it's the right choice. Because a watcher who abandons his own world for the sake of another's is not a watcher. He's a tool. And Dan was never a tool. A system message arrives at the end of the third year. To all players, simultaneously, the selection is complete. The Guardian has been found and has accepted the contract. The continent of Aurelian is transitioning to permanent mode. All players are granted resident status. Returning to their former worlds is impossible. Each resident is granted the right to travel to one of the available worlds, or to take up permanent residence in Aurelian. The choice is up to each individual. Dan reads this message while standing by the window in his workshop. Outside the window, Cedar Harbor goes about its morning routine. Smoke from the bakery. The clang of a hammer in Sarah's blacksmith shop. Children's laughter near the school. Tom's voice explaining how to hold a carving knife. The distant figure of Chong on the wall. Motionless, as always. Kevin crosses the square with an armful of firewood and tells a story to two newcomers who are laughing so hard they're doubled over. Hannah walks out of the hospital. She squints into the sun. She spots Dan at the window. She raises her hand. He raises his hand in response. She smiles. Quietly. Warm. Like someone who knows this is going to be a good day. Dan stands by the window. He looks out at the town he built, at the people he fed, at the walls he raised from the ground, at the life that grew from a rusty axe and a half-liter flask. He's no hero, not a king, not a legend. He's a guy who knows how to chop down trees and build a fire. And that turned out to be enough. He picks up the axe. He steps out of the workshop. The sun is warm. The wind smells of cedar. Today he needs to finish the rafters for the new warehouse, and sharpen the stakes along the southern perimeter, and bring Hannah some fresh willow bark, and check the garden beds, and fix the hinge on Min So's door, which has been creaking for 3 days now, and cut down 4 trees for the new school addition. There's a lot of work. There's always a lot. He walks across the square. Kevin spots him, shouts, "Good morning, boss." Dan says he's not the boss. He's a carpenter. Kevin grins. He says that carpenter or not, breakfast is on the table. Flatbreads, honey, hot broth. Dan stops. He looks at Kevin. At the table with the food. At the people who are already gathering for breakfast. At the town all around him. He sits down at the table, takes a flatbread, breaks it off, eats it. The flatbread is warm. The honey is thick. The broth is hot. Seated around him are the people he found in the forest, hungry, frightened, broken. Now they're sitting at the table and eating bread, in their own city, behind their own walls, under a sky with 2 moons. Dan finishes his flatbread, finishes his broth, stands up, picks up his axe, and goes to work.